Doctor Who Rogue is a really, really, really strange episode of the show. I'm actually properly confused here. I've got Ingiga from the UK and Tyler from the UK to help me, Neo from Australia, understand the issue here. The episode starts with alien monster person zaps into the body of another person. That's Doctor Who. I understand. That's totally fine. We get the opening credits. Doctor Who. Everything's fine. Everything's normal. I'm safe. I understand. And then these words come up and I don't understand these words. When we see an episode title, I'm used to seeing by Russell T Davies underneath it. And every now and again we might see by Stephen Moffat, or in the good old days by Chris Chibnall. But these names, I don't know these names. These names weren't involved in Series 3 of New Who. These names aren't names I've seen before. I don't understand what's going on. How is it Doctor Who when it's not by Russell T Davies?
Yeah, it was a quite radical break to do a non-showrunner episode or non-ex-showrunner episode for the first time in several years. It's interesting to see RTD break the mold so much. You know, this is a really experimental swing. So I think we can all appreciate that such kind of big moves are being taken. You know, this is even more experimental than 73 Yards, to be honest. I think actually getting someone else to write the show, you know, this is an experiment that could potentially pay off if they keep doing it.
Am I crazy, or has it been since The Haunting of Villa Diodati that we've had an episode that a showrunner didn't at least co-write?
Yeah, I think that's basically true.
4 years.
I mean, I would question how... I mean, the crediting during Chippu and Flux especially, I'm not sure how reliable that is, to be honest, because, you know, that's such a mess going on. But at least a solo credited episode, yeah, it was haunting.
I want to talk about the two writers who are Kate, Herron and Briony, Redman a bit later. But just as an actual episode, Tyler, what did you think of Rogue?
I was skeptical going in, but I completely agree with RTD that sci-fi Bridgerton is charming. I think there's like a sort of dissonance between, looking at the cold opener, I think that's a good way to gauge the sort of vibe of the episode. And I think there's a dissonance between it here exactly in sort of chirpy strings backing these two Georgian gentlemen arguing in the grounds of the English estate and this engulfing blue hue and lightning and static sound effects and like a grotesque sci-fi fantasy murder. And that dissonance actually creates a sort of harmony. So the cold open had me sold.
I think there's an irony with this episode that it's not a showrunner, but this kind of feels like, I don't mean this as an insult, I enjoyed the episode. This isn't a catty thing at all. Like, I actually seriously enjoyed the episode. I'm not trying to be backhanded here at all. It felt like good old Doctor Who. Like, this felt like an episode I could comfortably see in Series 4, or maybe even like Matt's era. Like, this is a very... Stock sounds insulting, but this feels like an episode you can slot into a lot of places, apart from, of course, the gay kiss and everything. But the kind of structure of the episode, the way it flows, just feels like very enjoyable Doctor Who working as it does. Which is funny, because in this season, we've had the actual Doctor Who man, RTD, doing all these things to make Doctor Who work a bit differently. He's had 2 episodes without the lead actor being in them much. He's setting up a new era of the show. He's kind of trying some different things. He's making it supernatural, all that stuff. And so it's the nun showrunner that's doing the episode that feels more to me like this is the episode of the season I could most easily see like in Series 2 or Series 3 or Series 4, which is interesting to me.
There's a flavour of... and I appreciate that this flavour is kind of Marmite in the sense that you're essentially either going to love it or hate it. But there's a flavour of RTD1 right off the bat. I think the concepts immediately established are like a fanish idea of some missing Series 2 episode. And I think it's sort of poetic that the so-called new Doctor Who is so old now, that it's being told by fans of the show in so many ways. This era is like the 2005 to present series inverting. It's like it's folding over itself. Which is a sort of RTD-esque horseshoe theory in a way.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, how many of the previous New Who episodes that people have been loved so much and praised so much, how many of those were in a way doing what this episode is doing, but for an older era? You know, like how many classic New Who episodes are actually like classic Who riffs or evolutions of it? So yeah, it's actually really good to finally get that, because it feels like the show is maybe growing up in a way, even if it is a kind of being nostalgic for itself here. But also, I think maybe, you know, even more importantly, In doing this kind of RTD1 pastiche, I feel this episode kind of brings what the season overall, like this season, was maybe missing slightly. As someone who is kind of skeptical of the concept of real Doctor Who or Doctor Who should be like this or whatever, it feels very weird for me to be valorising like the trad episode with the usual, animal face kind of naff villains as like a real Doctor Who or whatever. This is what Doctor Who should be like. But I think what it actually does is because it takes an interest in characters talking to each other and has an emotional arc of some kind for like the Doctor, and and has some time to breathe and looks at the relationships between characters. That in a way feels truer to, I guess, the bits of Doctor Who that consistently work, that really work. The drama, the dialogue, the characters. Than a lot of the other stuff we've had this season. And it feels like this episode is kind of the missing piece of the season, and even of maybe 15 as a Doctor so far, because it actually takes some time to let him be a character and express himself, and it just feels like this is like the heart and the warmth that maybe the season has lost. I mean, I've complained about it feeling kind of impersonal in ways, and this is the polar inverse of that. This is an episode that's all about the Doctor's relationship with a new character.
It's funny that, isn't it? Because I totally agree, but it's strange that should come from a non-showrunner.
It is strange, because this is what we would expect RTD to do, and to focus on the most. So it's odd that he's not doing that, and he's kind of delegated that to one of his like junior writers.
There's a thing I really hate. Once I saw online, I think it was someone, they were on like a Reddit thread, and they were like explaining, I think they had a nephew that killed themselves or something, very sad. And someone replied saying, oh, this is exactly like this anime. They were explaining how some anime they watched had the exact same thing happen. So I think it's really facile to go, hey, this thing reminds me of this thing. It's like the whole Boss Baby. If you've seen 2 movies and one of them was the Boss Baby, you're going to say there's a lot of Boss Baby similarities. But this episode reminded me a lot of 2 RTD1 era episodes. I mean, there's gestures to all sorts of things. I saw a lot of Unquiet Dead in how Ruby was talking to Emily and things like that. But The Empty Child, the Doctor Dances, Rogue as a character, I think he's actually playing against Captain Jack in a lot of ways. Like, I think he's being written to be the inverse of Captain Jack in a lot of ways, but he's still clearly riffing on a lot of those Captain Jack ideas. And similarly, the episode Captain Jack Harkness from Torchwood Series 1, which is where Captain Jack and Toshiko go back to the 1940s, and Captain Jack has like a romance with the actual Captain Jack he takes his name from in the 40s, war setting, and they have a big gay dance in front of everyone and a big kiss scene. I felt like these 2 writers of the episode, who would have been young people, young adults, maybe even younger for Briony, during the airing of those episodes, I feel like they must have... it just feels really cool that I was young when those episodes came out, and these writers would have been young when these episodes came out, and I feel like they're remixing beats from them in their own sort of way. And like Gig said, this is like what Russell and Moff and Chibnall would like doing with Classic Who. I just feel it's a very nice generational thing going on here, and I think the Captain Jack Harkness and Empty Child are great episodes, and so it's cool to kind of see some of what worked with those episodes work in this era now.
You mentioned Rogue playing against Captain Jack, and it strikes me that the dynamic that Rogue has with the Doctor is kind of a little bit of the inversion of 9 in Jack and Empty Child, isn't it? Because in Series 1, 9 totally is the one who's shrouded in a big leather wartime jacket, and he's the introverted one who's trying to resonate concrete, while Captain Jack is the dashing Lothario. Whereas in this episode, the Doctor is the outgoing extroverted one, and Rogue is the messy, traumatized, completely disheveled kind of nerd, kind of gamer who doesn't want to talk to anyone, and is just kind of like incelling it up in the corner of the ballroom. So yeah, it's really cool to see. The wheel has turned, hasn't it? Because now the Doctor's the shoe is on the other foot, basically.
Yeah, Captain Jack. I mean, Rogue is big blue coat, very handsome, dashing figure. Bounty hunter, time agent, it's all the same kind of roguish archetypes we're playing with here. A lot of people, when Jonathan Groff was cast, people went, this is Captain Jack recast, or this is, some sort of Captain Jack thing is going on here. I'm not sure why we actually jumped to, why did we jump to that? Because I understood why, I actually don't understand why I understood people doing that. Why did we do that? Is it just that he's a handsome, American, tall, gay-coated man?
I think we have to just put it down to, like, Doctor Who brain. Like, you know, the whole thing with Barrowman kind of getting, like, shunned by people and everything going on there. And we're just like, oh, this is to be some insane scheme to make the things link together again. And we just end up going to these very strange places that are completely incomprehensible to the layperson.
I think the reason, like, we love Captain Jack, and we do love Captain Jack, I totally push against this. We hate Barrowman now, therefore we must hate Captain Jack. That's bullshit. Captain Jack's an awesome, fantastic character. No Captain Jack revisionism here. We love Captain Jack, and we love River Song, and we love these sorts of huge characters that New Who came up with, and they were great because River Song isn't the Rani or Romana, and Captain Jack isn't, I don't really know a Captain Jack archetype in Classic Who, but they were new characters, right? They were new ideas. Well, River Song is obviously Benny from the Wilderness Years. There's tons of similarities there, the way that Rogue is a fair few similarities to Captain Jack, but River's still a new character with some of her own new stuff going on, just like Rogue is his own new character. And now we all want Rogue back. People want Rogue back, and in 10 years people will be going, why don't we give Rogue novels? Why isn't Rogue coming back? Why did he only come back 2 times? And I think that's great. If Rogue just was Captain Jack or an old character, it's not the same thing where we have that delight of the new. This era actually feels more solid to me now that we've got a character like this where we're going to talk about, hey, they should come back. The way we always used to say about River, or actually Jack, or whoever.
Yeah, that's another way this is kind of the missing piece of this season, because just by dint of having like a character who forms part of the series' identity, you know, rather than reusing one from previous series, it actually feels like more whole now. Like and again, it is a focus on character that really makes, you know, the difference.
I think when Chris Chibnall introduced Joe Martin as the Fugitive Doctor, that was a kind of a similar touchstone for what Chibnall Who eventually became. And I think there's it's important for any series, not just Doctor Who. It's important for any series to, rather than retread its own ground, to cough up something new. And I think it is fan-brained to have assumed, that he was Captain Jack. Or like say Romana, or I don't know, Sabalon Glitz is. I was when you were saying, who's the closest to classic? I'm sure the three of us kind of thought. I guess Sabalon is the closest to that.
Yeah,
it's nice to have to inject these new heartful things into stuff here.
What this also feels like to me is like this is one of the things that you said earlier in the season. This feels like actual RTD2 rather than just, you know, something else. And this was another time where it feels like, okay, we're actually iterating now on what RTD1 was like, because you know, as much as we compare this episode to RTD1 episodes, this specific episode, you know, it didn't happen in RTD1. There was nothing actually like this in RTD1. There are gay characters, there were, you know, gay moments, little, you know, gay bits and pieces here and there, but you know, there was not an episode where like a same-sex romance like with the Doctor was like the heart of the episode. And that is a way, I mean, you could easily say that we are late, you know, getting here, but you know, we are here now. And this episode kind of revels in and has a lot of fun with the fact that it's a queer romance. And I feel that it kind of feels like the completion of a promise. You know, it feels like this is maybe the promise of RTD1 finally being realised.
This is why I hate, like, there's a lot of media reports now, Doctor Who's first same-sex kiss or whatever, and then you're getting a lot of, to be precise, you know, people talking about, but so-and-so, 9 kissed Jack, and then even Classic Who had some interesting moments, Torchwood did it, but all those, like, that's the point, is that that's not the real deal. Like, Torchwood did it, and I love Torchwood, but Torchwood was Torchwood. That was a spin-off late at night, you know, where the kiddies weren't watching so much. The 9 and Jack kiss in Parting the Ways, I adore. I'm pretty sure we've all talked about it on here before, but it's not the same thing as this. Rogue and 15 have a big loving kiss, and it's the big romantic climax of the episode. Yeah, the show's never done this before. Sure, it's had, you know, 11 kissing Rory, but come on, that's not the same thing. It's great that it happened. I love that moment, but it's not the same thing at all. This is a big, big new thing, big new step. And yeah, it feels like RTD... This is why I hate when people like saying, well, Chibnall got so much shit and RTD never got this shit back in the day. Or, you know, the show on a cycle, people go on, I was young and I remember this gay drama stuff around RTD all the time. I shouldn't have even been seeing it. I was that young. But all this homophobic insanity was always happening around RTD and RTD1. And so for him to be able to do this now on like the Disney series, no less, yeah, it does feel like a huge deal. It is a celebratory thing. It's great. And also that it's not him, that it's writers that aren't even... Russell T Davis. We can't. The whole thing there is really, really, really interesting as well. So there's like a whole timeline of what happened there. A few years ago, I forget how many years ago, there was the Loki TV show. I think it was 2020 because I think Avengers Endgame was 2019, I think, around then. And then Loki was like a sequel kind of thing to that. Loki was a spin-off show on Disney Plus about Loki. He's now alive following Avengers and, Loki adventures. And Loki was a very Doctor Who inspired show, or at least Doctor Who adjacent show, Doctor Who similar show. I think you guys would agree.
Yeah, it does the whole thing. Got a trickster figure in various times and places. And also it kind of gets bogged down in bureaucratic institutions and stuff, similarly to how Doctor Who sometimes does. So maybe that's true.
Yeah. Loki had an episode where Loki's talking to his self-obsessed female counterpart.
What a way to introduce that.
It's an interesting show. To preface all this, Kate Herron directed Loki season 1. The Marvel Disney Plus shows in general didn't used to have showrunners, partly because I don't think they wanted a huge creative force to, consolidate and control everything on a show. So they used to try and pass it all out. They'd have a writer, do all the scripts, and then the writer would go away. And then they would have a director come and ostensibly just direct the scripts, but that's never how it would actually work out, at least when the shows that actually worked. The director would kind of become a quasi-showrunner, at least in my opinion, from the interviews I've read, because they would, do little rewritey things and they would reframe stuff and they would change stuff. So Kate Herron was the big creative force of Loki season 1, I would say in my interpretation, more than the actual writer. Anyway, so Kate Herron leading the charge on Loki season 1. Loki season 1 has a scene where Loki, talking to his self-obsessed female version, makes an allusion to being bisexual. And then Russell T Davies said something about that in the press with an asterisk there. He clarifies later that he apparently didn't mean to say this as publicly as it came out. He said, "I think that's a very great worry. Huge clearing warning bells are ringing as the giants rise up with Netflix and Disney Plus. Loki makes one reference to being bisexual once and everyone's like, oh my God, it's like a pansexual show. It's like one word. He said the word prince and we're meant to go, thank you, Disney, aren't you marvelous? It's a ridiculous, craven, feeble gesture towards the vital politics and the stories that should be told." Also, Kate Herron isn't straight for what it's worth. She's queer. So that was interesting. And I think there was a lot of... How did you guys feel? I'm sure you probably remember Russell saying that. Do you remember how people reacted to that, or how you guys reacted to RTD blasting the Loki bisexuality stuff?
It was exciting, wasn't it, to hear somebody with such prominence talk about these Disney overlords, these streaming overlords, sort of hinting at these things without really any substance. And it's interesting, isn't it, how far we've come with RTD.
Yes, it was very nice because, because a big part of this is the media ecosystem around these things. So, Loki says Prince, then you get 100 articles going, oh my God, this is game-changing, whoa. But ultimately, it's just you're having scraps dangled at you and you're being asked to, say thank you and be so grateful because, and it's narrowing the horizons of what seems possible by inflating the smallest things. So yeah, I was very delighted to hear RTD rip into that with the savagery that it deserved.
Kate Herron responded in the press saying, I don't disagree that there should be bigger stories being told, but, and I think he has a right to his opinion, I'm very proud of what we did in the show. Russell is a hero of mine, but like I've said, I hope that we did at least open the door and that more stories will come. So a very diplomatic response, not pushing back at all, really.
Yeah.
I felt kind of sorry for her because I felt like Disney are the ones in charge. I doubt that her ideal version of the show is just one little line about it. I don't know, I'm putting words in her mouth, but I doubt that.
Yeah, it does feel like as much as... Yeah, what RTD is attacking is kind of the whole, sphere of it. It's not so much the line itself or the episode itself, the show, even necessarily the show itself that is some wrongness here. It's the lack of other things, in general, elsewhere, or in that same area. It's kind of the punishment kind of falls upon her and her show in particular.
A few years after all this Kate Herron Loki stuff, we get the big announcement. There's guest writers on season 1 of Doctor Who. It's not just Russell and Moffat. There's other people, being Kate Herron and Briony Redman, who's like a writing partner of Kate Herron's. They've written a bunch of stuff together, so like a writing team. Writing in season 1. And Russell did the whole press release, everyone was very complimentary. Everyone was really nice to each other. Briony and Kate were very positive about Doctor Who, and Russell was very positive about them, saying their episode is going to be not like any other episode of Doctor Who, which is kind of funny because we're kind of praising it for kind of being like other Doctor Who. Anyway, and recently Russell also clarified something where he was saying that I love Loki. I actually found Loki very Doctor Who-y and wasn't surprised to find that there was a British sensibility behind it, I actually made contact with Kate Herron because there was a terrible set of circumstances where, without thinking, I accidentally criticized Loki in what I didn't realize was an interview. I thought it was one of those online sessions talking to students.
So he still said it.
So suddenly poor Kate Herron, he still said it. Poor Kate Herron has been confronted by reporters saying, "What do you think about what Russell T Davies has said?" I'd never met her, so I contacted her to say, "I'm so sorry. And maybe I might disagree with this or that in Loki, but I would never put you in an embarrassing situation. How unprofessional of me." She was absolutely delightful about it and so kind and so lovely, so we became friends. We started chatting to each other, and eventually I said, "Look, we both agree on so much. We've got very like minds and we love our sci-fi. Do you want to write an episode of Doctor Who?" So
it is a direct timeline. It's the thing. It's not a coincidence. Like, this one thing actually led to the other. So all's well that ends well in the end, isn't it? So maybe RCD should just randomly drag more people, in what he thinks was not an interview.
It's a nice little journey. Yeah, I think Tyler alluded to this earlier, but I had really low hopes for this episode because I hated every bit of promo material. I found all the "oh my god, it's Bridgerton" lines really grating. The monsters just looked kind of pat and rogue. I don't know, just nothing was working for me. So I was prepared to really, really hate this and find it completely disposable and to be thinking, why do we get these non-RTD episodes? They're just going to be fluff. So I went into it with quite a negative energy, and yeah, it won me over really, really quickly. It was pretty delightful. I have issues with it. Like, I have some things that I think work weirdly in the script, especially, but it has a heart, like Gig says, and it actually flows really well. Like, a lot of my complaints for this season have been, I think the episodes are flowing bizarrely. Church had moments like that. Dot and Bubble had some really weird pacing, but this flowed like a classic Tenet episode. You felt like it was over before it began in a good way. So yeah, and Jonathan Groff, we haven't really talked about him. He's great. I really like him, and he was just delightful, and I could totally see why 15 fell for him so quickly. I love his energy, and he really got into the show. I don't know if you guys have seen, but like, reporters are asking like classic, so where would you time travel to questions, and he's giving these lovely, heartfelt, deep answers. He watched The Ark in Space when Russell sent it over to him. Like, he's really, really engaged with the show, which is really lovely. And so have Kate and Briony. They wrote the novelization of their own. It's just like everyone seems to love Doctor Who here. Groff and the writers. It's just everything it just feels really nice. It feels like a really nice time, this episode, and everything around it.
He sent Groff The Ark in Space. How many new actors did he send Ark in Space to?
He sent him The Ark in Space, Unearthly Child, Bad Wolf Parting the Ways, and another episode that I forget. Blink. He sent him Blink as well. Those are the 4 stories he sent to Groff. Pretty good set, I think.
Just the basics to prove that the show is actually good, contrary to what you may think.
Good. Yeah.
I think Groff, he really did get into it. Like, I think in the behind the scenes, he talked about how he felt doing the dance with Shooty and being transported away. Like, this really profound experience he had. Like, that's really cool. I think he's just the kind of guy you want in Doctor Who. I think he has the right attitude for it. Regarding the casting of Groff, this might be a complete non-point. Like, maybe this is just nonsense, but I feel like in terms of how he looks and how he feels like as a character, he feels like he's the Doctor Who version of the archetype. So he isn't quite like exactly the brooding, like hubby, dark, handsome, brooding, wonderful, like stranger archetype. He looks a little bit scruffier than that, a little bit sadder than that. That's not an insult. This is like, he's great acting. A little bit like cuddlier than that, if that makes sense. Maybe it's how he's styled partly as well.
Yeah.
There is something that he doesn't quite cut this like sharp figure. There is something a little bit like scruffy and sad and like scrimblow bimblow about him. He's like a little lost teddy bear.
He's really, I love his energy. I think he's really cool. It's like he's got this big masculine like strength to him. Like he's very handsome, and he does feel like, he's in control of situations. He doesn't feel like a side, character or whatever. He has that inherently like in control energy, but he feels really, how to describe it? Like, I thought his casting in The Matrix 4 was so interesting because he has that, it's like he's undercutting the roles he gets in really interesting ways. Like, his energy plays against the expectations of him in interesting ways. Like, I'm really struggling for the right adjectives to use here. You've seen Matrix 4, at least Gig has. His energy in that is so strange, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously the fact that he's kind of playing sort of a new version of a character who is very iconic, it means he has to be a little bit almost snake-like. There is something, and he's playing a very weird character to begin with. But yeah, he has this slightly out of center like energy to him. And yeah, I don't really know how to put it into words either.
Even stuff like Mindhunter, where he's kind of playing these more typical in some ways roles. It's like a little bit of subversive energy he brings, or a sensitive energy. Maybe it's a sensitive energy I'm thinking of. You see it in this episode where he's like a big bounty hunter in control, but he's very softly spoken in some ways, and the way he acts with his eyes, I just think is really, really interesting and delightful. He's like, you keep thinking about it. Well, maybe I'm just telling on myself here. I just think he's really cool. I think he's great. I think it would have been really hard to have the Doctor falling in love with someone really quickly work with anyone not as like magnetic as he is.
Now you mention it. So like, how do we feel about, I guess, the progress of that romance in general? Because I think maybe a common line of criticism for this episode is it believable? That they kind of cook up like so fast, and that it kind of happens so fast. And maybe part of it is that we're not used to seeing the Doctor be the one pursuing someone else romantically. We're used to seeing the Doctor pursued, maybe, or like flirted with, teased with a little bit. But to have the Doctor meet someone and be like really aggressively, trying to flirt with them and like trying to chat them up and trying to immediately, and like, I mean, we get the Doctor doing companion seduction type things, trying to get someone on as a companion, maybe failing. But like, I think to have it be, I think as just, it's really full on here. I think the 15 really, really goes for it. I think like from like step one, immediately we're straight in there. Like, you're hot. I'm giving you these sex eyes. I think this is not a complaint. I think this is really interesting to actually do something. It feels new, I think, is the main thing.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Can I be that guy and ask, if Rogue were a woman, would we feel that in a more intense way or a less intense way? What would the difference be? Stunned silence. What a question. If Rogue were a woman, do you think people would be going, oh, the Doctor's going too far, flirting with they're too sexualized and, they're too magnetized, the Doctor now, they can't do that? Or do you think people would be more chill with it, or do you think it'd be pretty much the same?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you're going to be greeted with silence again, I'm afraid. Let me think.
It could even come off worse, potentially. It depends on how the woman was playing the role.
Yeah, I think if it was the same as it is, I think if it was played exactly the same beat for beat as it is here, I think it would be worse.
But if the woman was like Alex, like River, and was like very domineering in return, maybe it would feel more like less questionable.
But then you're talking about writing it completely differently, aren't you?
Yeah. I see why some people like it was a big step when McGann kissed Grace in the TV movie. That was big. And then it was another big step when Tennant like had an actual romance with Madame de Pompadour. These are all big steps. I get that this is kind of another step where we've had Doctor romances, and it's not even just that it's a gay romance. It's that the Doctor, like Gig is saying, he's very hungry for Rogue, like very, very quickly. Like I don't think he's lustful exactly, but he's very, well, maybe he is. He's very, very proactively pursuing Rogue very quickly. I can see why some viewers would be like, even if they're chill with like Doctor romances, they find this a little discourteous maybe. I don't feel that at all. I thought Rogue was very magnetic, and I got what the Doctor was doing. But I can see why the characterization would feel new, even if not objectionable. I can see that.
I've got no objections to Doctor Who being this way. I think, when I say Doctor Who, I mean the character. I think that Doctor Who is always kind of tripping over its own set of rules as a show, because it spanned over such a long period, over so many writers, over so many actors, that it's got inherent kind of unwritten, and some of them written, I suppose, rules. There's a sort of handbook to be played by, and I think in some ways what RTD is telling us is that there are rules in Doctor Who and we follow them, and this is how Doctor Who is, and this is our lens. But I think with this, and with a few things in this season, including the move away from hard sci-fi towards like fantastical elements, I think this is another example of we can do anything with this show. You know that thing that RTD would always talk about in sort of 2005 to 2010? He always say that what I love about Doctor Who is that it can go anywhere, it can do anything with Doctor Who. Yeah. I think we're really doing that now. We're doing that, I was going to say to a fault, but I think to me it's not, because even if there are things in season 1 that have not chimed with me in a way that they might for other people, I think it's exciting to take this very old show with very old concepts and inject new things into it.
Yeah. And it's like 15 isn't the Doctors we've seen before. This isn't Tennant. This isn't Pertwee. This isn't Richard E. Grant. Like, it's okay for maybe those Doctors wouldn't have pursued Rogue so proactively, but this is a different Doctor. You know, this is his personality. So it's not necessarily even changing the character. This is just a new version of the character. If people really find it hard to deal with, that's one way to kind of go with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I also kind of think ultimately, if you can't deal with this, I think in a way the show isn't for you anymore. I think that's maybe quite harsh to say, but I think that is true. I think if there are things that season 1 is doing that don't work for you because they don't follow the Doctor Who handbook, the show isn't being written for you anymore. It's being written for that audience that RTD was talking about the other day, that 21 to 30 audience.
I think it's normal for now and again the show to stop being for you. Like, it's happened for all of us at least once. If you're a fan for a long time, I think you're a very unusual fan if you're like equally happy with it, everything ever. I know there are some fans like that and they confuse me. Great for them. They enjoy the show more than I do. But I think it's normal for some people to occasionally drop out of the show and to be saying, the character's not really working for me. The head writer's not really working for me. I'm dipping for a while. Like, I think it's a shame if the thing sending you off is the Doctor, you know, finding love in a character quickly. But if it is, it's this. Yeah, but I mean, even the show isn't always going to have Russell. Well, actually, maybe it will. But it's possible the show won't always have Russell running it. If you want to imagine the future, just picture Russell T Davies, pen to paper, forever. But you know, one day he won't be running. One day he won't be running the show, and the show may be less queer if that's what you're really hanging out for. So, time brings all sorts of changes. That doesn't feel like a happy statement, but I think it is a true one.
It is true. Yeah, I think.
But also, we're conflating being queer with. I think there are definitely fans who have nothing wrong with the gay romance, but they're just like, I don't like the Doctor being so hungry. I would have preferred like a slower courtship, which is I totally get it. I don't feel the same way, but I think that's fair. Of course, it's not fair if they're just going gross.
I can see the expectation behind it. Yeah.
Another characterization thing is, I think like this is early days for Ncuti's Doctor. Hopefully, anyway, I hope that him pining for Rogue at the end feels like one of those character moments where like this is what the Doctor is now. Like, I feel like, and when we remember 15 in like 10 years time, I think one of the things we'll remember his whole stuff with Rogue. Remember how he had that Rogue romance and he wanted Rogue, and then Rogue sacrificed himself and Rogue did. Like, I feel like we're seeing some of the building blocks of the character here. We're still in his first season. There's like stuff to do with the 10th Doctor that we all think is one of his most iconic things, and it's something that just like started in series 4. You know, there's stuff like that. So I feel like 15's being kind of put together still at this point in some ways. It's weird for Ncuti because I feel like in the Giggle, he burst on so fully formed, and I feel like he's almost been walked back in season 1. I don't know how he managed what he did in the Giggle. That's astonishing for his first, 15 minutes of acting as the character to like blow everyone away and take over the show. I don't think it's weird that he's kind of stepped back in some ways. I think it's partly the writing as well, but I feel like the character's still being put together a bit now in season 1, and so this Rogue stuff is part of, I think, who he is. Yeah,
with Ncuti, I think more than anything, it's that he's so far in the season, he's basically either cried and ran away or not been present. And I think that's really, that's not done him many favours in Doctor characterisation. And yeah, this is a first step, and it's a big step, but this is a first step towards, 15 being fleshed out in a way that really, he was only really fleshed out in the 2 2023 episodes that he had.
I think a lot of Doctor actors are really good at specific things, and then it's like the scripts that tailor to that, they just work amazingly in. And then I think there's a couple of Doctor actors who kind of do the opposite, where they kind of brutalize each script into working for them, whether the script likes it or not. But that's kind of what happened with Tom Baker, especially in his later seasons, where it was more, he was like a vortex sucking in the scripts and making them what he wanted to be. And like that was part of, why season 18 happened as it did, is because Tom had basically taken over the show in a lot of ways. Most Doctor actors, I don't think, are quite doing that. I think most Doctor actors are kind of variable based on the script they're getting and based on, the direction they're getting. I think there's only a couple of actors that kind of flip it the other way and force themselves over the show. I feel like I'm phrasing this weirdly, but Ncuti, I found this season, it's when he's used well, he's absolutely astonishing. And then this season has kind of constrained him in some weird ways. Like you're saying, there are some weird repetitive emotional beats we're getting with him. He's being played passively. I don't mean Shooty playing him passively as much as like the scripts are putting him in on a passive back foot in some ways. I think it just stands out because in the giggle, he was so incredible the whole time.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a tricky thing. And I guess he has a whole other season at least after this to see how he handles it.
That's kind of the saving grace, isn't it? I'm conscious constantly that, you know, he's in season 2, probably be in season 3, might be in season 4. There's more time to come, but I think it's an unfortunate situation to be in. I don't want to, shit all over season 1 too much, because there are things that I've really liked. There are lots of things about Shooty that I've really liked, but yeah, probably the biggest problem for me is that I've felt, that we've only got 8 episodes, and with every passing episode, and at this point it's kind of a failed, it's a failed prospect. With every passing episode, I've thought, okay, when are we going to step it up now for Shooty?
Well, he's not in 2 of the episodes really either. He's in 6 of the episodes really.
Yeah, I can forgive that. That's its own like logistical issue, isn't it? Practical issue. I think it's important to note again that we brought it up right at the beginning that this is an episode not written by RTD. I understand I completely understand the way TV works. I understand the idea of commissioning and the idea of exec producing and whatever, but this is not RTD's own episode. I've been a few times disappointed by, RTD's own creative direction, in this season, but particularly in that sense, particularly that it doesn't seem to have mattered to him too much to flesh out this incarnation of the Doctor. I guess partly because this is the production of season 1 is constantly kind of overshadowed by the production of season 2. I almost feel like this was always seen, even in its production, as the prelude season, the prologue season. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think the sex education filming going on for so long was difficult, and then the season it's filmed very out of order for Shooty as well. I think he's really quite good in Church, which I know came later on than some of the other episodes. So it's a tricky journey for an actor. I think what works with this episode is that with Groff and Rogue, he gets a very different kind of energy to play off than he has had with guest casts or with Millie. I think my favourite 15 moment of the season might even be when he's dancing to Kylie Minogue on the Rogue ship.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where he's just so full of joy and like playfulness, and how he's like poking at Rogue with doing that. He's just so much fun and just incredible in that scene. It's nice for him to get that sort of energy.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's in one of my notes. My absolute favourite scene this season with Shooty, with the 15th Doctor, is that scene. Yeah, it's beautiful.
I love that the scene milks it. Like, I thought he would just play it like twice or 3 times, but it goes on and on and on, and I think it's funnier every moment.
It is, yeah, it is great. Yeah, great scene.
Rogue, there's actually something I've been outright confused by, and I didn't really notice the first time I watched the episode. I think it just brushed me by, but I was thinking about it later, and then when I rewatched the episode, it stood out to me. I don't quite understand. So Rogue knows that there's like shapeshifters around, and that's why he's there bounty hunting the shapeshifter. He thinks there's only one, not a whole pack, but he's there to incinerate them or whatever. That's fine. He's a bounty hunter. That makes sense. He thinks the Doctor is the shapeshifter because the Doctor seems, like a spacey guy who, he seems like a sci-fi character, so he apprehends the Doctor. That's fine. He like scans the Doctor or whatever, says you are a shapeshifter, Time Lord, that's fine. That makes sense to me. Then we like see Richard E. Grant and Joe Martin and some other doctors I haven't heard of, go around his head, and the Doctor gives a speech, I'm a Lord of Time from Gallifrey. And Rogue actually says, wow. And Rogue's like, okay, I'll let you go. You're not the bird aliens. But then later on, Rogue's like asking, what's Gallifrey? Where are you taking me? Where is that place? So Rogue doesn't know what Time Lords are, I'm guessing. Why is, I feel like I'm nitpicking, but I actually don't understand. Why does Rogue get bored over by that speech? Because couldn't the Doctor have just been a bird alien that had done 17 other human-y faces? I don't get why was he convinced by all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the idea is just that, yeah, it falls pretty flat, doesn't it? But I think the idea is just that there's an emotional connection there.
Yeah.
Already, and they've already fallen for each other's kind of shtick. So when the Doctor pulls out his classic I'm Doctor, I'm from
Yeah.
that kind of really that really kind of works on a character that's flawed by him. Yeah, it is a bit schlocky.
The emotional connection makes sense. Like Rogue was actually, whoa, Lord of Time, that sounds awesome. He seems to really know what he's talking about. That makes sense to me. I was just confused when later on he's going, so what's Gallifrey then? Because I like my initial assumption was, oh, he knows what that is. He's a bounty hunter. He's heard of Time Lords like Captain Jack had.
A line like that for me was, I think the line is, so what is this ancient Earth tradition of cosplay? That's kind of how I felt about that line. I kind of, I can accept a weak line. So it's not that I have an issue with it. I genuinely don't understand, because that was ADR'd in. I don't understand what the actual purpose of that was, because the Doctor goes on to explain what cosplay is anyway. Is it just simply the fact that he doesn't use the word cosplay in his explanation of cosplay? Is that why that was ADR'd?
The cosplay stuff confuses me. So is Rogue an alien? Because when he runs over to Ruby and Emily, he says, are we meant to be telling humans? Like all the sci-fi stuff. So is he like one of those Voyage of the Damned aliens that looks completely human? Like that's fine. I don't know what he is. But he knows what D&D is. Like he likes Dungeons and Dragons. He doesn't know what cosplay is. And he doesn't know that this is like a homophobic time either. Yeah, I wonder what his background is. He's a time-traveling, human-y looking alien.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the impression that I got. And if not that, then I think Captain Jack was like a far future Earth colony human, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So I think maybe perhaps something like that. I don't know. Did Jack sort of distance himself from humans in the same way?
I don't think he would say, are we telling the humans? He'd probably have some insulting term for him instead. But who knows? Another Rogue thing that confused me. So the villains are bird aliens here, and Rogue's ship looks like a bird. That's just an odd little disconnection.
Yeah. I think there are a few things that have confused some viewers' perceptions on the character. I think that being one of them. Bad Guy by Billie Eilish playing on the first Groff scene. Do you know what I'm talking about here? So
people are thinking he's actually a bird alien and he's the bad guy and his bird ship gives it away.
Sure, yeah. I think, you could read that as perhaps an indication of his true character and will be exposed later on, but I don't think so for two reasons.
No, yeah.
The first, I think there will be tension between the Doctor and Rogue, obviously just due to the nature of the way drama works, but also due to the nature of Rogue's work, which I'd like to talk about later. The second reason is because I think RTD is building a River Song-like spouse for 15, and I think the long-term value of that far outweighs the short-term punchiness of Groff returning as a villain, I was tricking you all along, and this completely changes the perception of that episode that I was last in. So unless the villain arc will be played over the course of seasons, which could be done, I don't rule that out. I'm not all knowing, and RTD is. I just don't buy that theory.
It's really selfless what he does at the end. It's my impression. I think he was kind of impulsive. I don't think I don't think he's usually as heroic a figure as he was at the end there. It seems like he was checking with the Doctor. What would you do for your companion? That sort of thing, and they have the kiss. And then it's this manic almost, how he pushes Ruby out the way, throws the flowers kind of with a smile or a bemused expression, and then, gets warped away. Find me. I get my read of how Groff acted that was that Rogue doesn't usually do that sort of thing, but he's in this romantic thing with the Doctor. And so he's kind of impulsively, I'm going to do a big good deed, a big selfless deed here. I'm going to save, this companion for him. Come find me. That felt sort of how Captain Jack saves the day if the Doctor dances and he tries to take the missile thing off, even if it means he'll blow up too. That's how that read to me. So I don't think he's I think he's regularly, he's a rogue. So regularly he's a grey figure, not a good or bad figure. And that's the interesting thing he does at the end here is does such a good act that of course the Doctor's going to fixate on him extremely hard now, because not only was he attracted to him before, he just did such an amazing, heroic thing, and now he could be anywhere. It's the most romantic thing possible, isn't it? Now the Doctor will forever pine over him. I think that's more interesting drama and romance than, he was actually bad and he wants to betray the Doctor and he's going to come back and, yeah.
Yeah, totally, yeah. I think there are two big tells that that's not the sort of thing that this character would have done prior to meeting the Doctor. The first is that before doing what he did, his big romantic gesture. He tells the Doctor to push the button. And it's that bemused expression when he's in the Triform that sells that. Yeah. I think actually, while we're on the topic, Groff does a lot of heavy lifting, doesn't he, for this script? There's loads of stuff that I think is undersold and, I'm going to use the word underwritten, that Groff beefs up. Would you agree?
There's a lot of what's going on with the Triform is kind of confusing towards the end, and I feel like the plot is kind of, I feel like there's some, what's the word? I feel like I can see the strain or the strings a little bit there, but Groff is just kind of plowing through it, and you even if the plot's not making total sense, the emotions make sense, and a lot of that's thanks to Groff.
He reminded me actually of, you talk about this sometimes on the podcast, you talk about there being certain Doctor actors who will just take a script and own it. You know, no matter what they get, no matter what they're working with, they will turn it into something, turn it to gold. Matt Smith being probably the best example of that. And I really think that's what Groff is doing in a lot of cases here. That's not to say, this is not like a terribly weak script or anything. I enjoyed it in a lot of places, and I particularly, I really enjoyed this episode, in many ways. But, I think Groff is like I say, I think he's doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah. Millie is, usually Millie's the one I'm praising. She's not in the episode heaps, really. She has kind of a small subplot, which leads to her, thing at the end where, hey, I'm not the bird alien. I used poker face battle mode to, win against her. She's not in it heaps. The interesting thing with Millie I found this episode is I'm kind of noticing by now, we're on the 7th episode with her, some of her affectations I'm noticing as affectation. This sounds like it's an insult. It's not at all. It's like by the end of series 2 in 2006, you're kind of noticing the Tennetisms. The first 3 episodes, it's like, oh, Tennant's doing this, Tennant's doing that. And by the end of the season, you know all the different stuff he does. By now, I'm noticing Ruby's tics. I can see there's certain comedy beats or, physicality stuff Millie does for the character. That's not really a positive or negative. I kind of see what she's doing now. I see that certain movements and, line delivery she does a lot now.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I really like, I like Millie a lot. I like Ruby a lot. And I like all of those acting tics. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. I love all of that. I think she's great. I think she's, you've spoken about it here before. She's great at, even in the background of the scene, really melding into the scene, constantly acting, constantly performing, in a way that kind of few actors, tend to do. She was particularly good actually in, I thought in Dot and Bubble, right at the end there, where, that's really Shooty's moment, and that's, you need to kind of, as an actor, you need to be muted for that and let Shooty work. But what she's doing is, Ruby's still kind of present. She's not, she's not, hamming up any of that acting at all, but she's not stood by the TARDIS in the back. She's working there. I think she's great.
A weird thing with Ruby this episode is, this season, RTD1 did this sometimes. RTD2 does it a lot, where we get flashbacks to scenes from the same episode. We had a little bit of that here. Also, sometimes we get flashbacks to scenes in the same season, which is a bit more normal. Sometimes it can still be annoying because it's kind of over-egged. But here we got this weird thing of, there's shape of it feels like it's a flashback to an episode earlier in the season, but it's not. We never actually got the scene, which is where the Doctor and Carla are talking. Presumably this is meant to be from the end of Space Babies, when, the Doctor and Ruby come, hey, I'm a time traveler now. Here's the Doctor again after church. And Carla's, you got to keep Ruby safe. I get that she'll go off an adventure and whatevs, but you got to keep her safe. And that feels to me, this isn't really a complaint, but that feels like the sort of scene you play with. Oh, remember when they said that earlier in the season? If Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways wanted to flash back to an Aliens of London Jackie scene talking to Nine, that would make total sense structurally. It was just interesting here. Maybe it's because of the season, short order or something, I don't know, but just that we hadn't actually seen that scene before. I've seen people compare it to, but hey, Worlds Enough in Time has a flashback to the 12th Doctor and Bill talking, and we never actually saw that scene. It's new for the episode, but hey, that's a characterization scene. Isn't it the same thing? But I don't think it is, because series 10 was a full season, and we got loads of Bill Doctor scenes. We got scenes, of Bill's family and interactions there, the Doctor having stuff to do with that. We had lots of connections there. this season's been so short and there's been so few Carla scenes. And most of the Carla scenes have been like evil Carla. That's like another, like the Shooty crying in passive scenes is one of those things where I think it's just because the season's so short, when something gets repeated more than once, it stands out a lot. And I think we have the same thing where Carla was really cruel in the aborted Tyne Lime in church, and she was really cruel in the 73 yards aborted Tyne Lime. Yeah, so I just think it just felt a little strange to me that, oh yeah, we've never actually seen that scene of Doctor and Carla talking about this. I kind of wish we had that earlier, but it's a new scene, not a flashback.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, isn't it, that we've kind of been talking for ages about, when are we going to get these big emotional moments? When are we going to get these really emotional scenes? And it's unfortunate that it's taken this long. It's unfortunate that we're doing it in flashbacks as well, yeah. I think there's no reason really that shouldn't have, that scene shouldn't have come previously. I think it's a bit cheap, to do it in a flashback in this way, and it's not the same. It's really not the same as what we did with Bill in, World Enough Time. Because that scene was, it's hard to explain the formula of that kind of thing, but there's a big difference between what Moffat was doing there it was really feeding into the emotion and the tension of that scene, and it was cutting in and out, and, you explained it well. Whereas this is something bad happens to Ruby and the Doctor feels bad about it, and then this is why the Doctor feels bad about it, because we're going to show you this scene now where the Doctor has an emotional stake in keeping Ruby safe, and then we're going to pull back to the scene once we've explained to you the problem there. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's just I really liked Church Ruby Road, and I really like how Carla and Cherry are set up. And I just kind of expected, like, RTD usually goes to the families all the time in his older seasons, and I'm just kind of confused. Like, I thought that's what you did, RTD. You go to the companions' home lives all the time. So much so that a lot of people got annoyed when Moffat's era started, going, hey, why don't we see Amy's parents more? Why don't we see that, that? So it's weird this season actually, like, I think Carla and Cherry are great. I want to see them more. Even Mrs. Flood, like, I want to see Ruby's whole family, home unit more. And I just assumed that that's what RTD would do. So I've kind of been surprised that that's not what he's doing. And so a scene like this just makes me kind of go, hey, I wish we were getting RTD one-ish family scenes more, because you're really good at those, RTD. And I like these characters.
I think maybe this is one of the drawbacks of the functions of doing this show as a major streaming show. Because rather than spending whole minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes on emotions and emotional stakes and conversations between characters, you'll kind of get the bare bones of what you need in an episode. And we'll kind of rush through all of those central ideas and then rush on to the next thing, and then on to the next thing, and then on to the next thing, rather than stopping to breathe, which is, that's a new TV formula, isn't it? That's like I don't know what you call it. It's like a TikTok generation TV formula. And so is doing this kind of thing in a flashback, as opposed to doing it in a previous episode and maybe flashing back to it in that sense. Or even, maybe the old way of doing, the old way of doing this is just doing it in a previous episode and then not flashing back to it at all, because you rely on your viewers to have viewed the content.
The interesting thing with thinking Ruby was actually dead for a bit there, with why that whole Carla scene exists in the first place, is because this is right before the finale. I actually thought, I don't know if I'm a really stupid viewer, I thought that might be legit for a while. I was thinking, whoa, did they actually kill Ruby off in Rogue? That's interesting. And then I guess is the next episode like the Hellbent-esque, the Doctor will do anything to get Ruby back, and that the, unit something time travel timelines. Like, I actually bought the Ruby death thing for a moment. Am I just a really dumb viewer, or how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I did, but I'm quite a gullible viewer, so it's slightly different with me.
Yeah, me too.
I think, with that, I'm really sold on the emotional stakes of it because of the way that Millie plays it. I think the way that the episode plays, I really do think it all comes down to Millie here. I don't think the way that the director of the episode plays it, I don't think the way that Groff and Shooter play it, because they're doing their own thing. I don't think any of that stuff should be a general indication that what happens in this episode feeds into the finale in a big way, in a sort of, in like a Face the Raven, Heaven Sent, Hellbent kind of way. But what Millie Gibson is doing is playing it 100% straight, as if Ruby is going to die, or, going to be separated from the Doctor, never to be seen again. And she's playing it as a final goodbye to the Doctor, and I think that's so fascinating that she even has, the emotional kind of capacity as an actor to take on that kind of thing.
Kate and Briony had more aliens original, and it was RTD's idea, do some birds. And RTD really likes these aliens because back in his day, if you were doing a bunch of alien costumes, you could afford that, but they'd all have to be the same, like the Jadoon. This is the first bipedal aliens he's done where they all have different costumes. Like they're the same alien species, but they all look different. So he was very excited about that.
He ought to be. They're gorgeous, aren't they?
Yeah, they're really cool.
Really, really beautiful designs. Really amazing. Really, really, really well done. I really like the...
I love the eyebrows one.
Yeah, so cool. Yeah, really, really amazing. Yeah. It's a great testament to the Doctor Who design team and what the budget for those things can create now.
I know the Regency setting wasn't from the get-go. The romance stuff was from the get-go from the writers, but originally they wanted like a party going across one night, the Kate and Briony, but they were going back and forth with RTD, like when should we set it? In what era do we set the party? So it took a while before they settled on the Regency era, which is interesting. If it was World War II, it would have felt way too derivative of not just Captain Jack Harkness, I think a few episodes. I think this was a good setting, and it let them do the whole Bridgerton, thing, which is, I know it's very RTD, like 2005 series was so hooked into reality TV at the time. I think it works for Doctor Who to be hooked into the TV at the time. So doing a big Bridgerton riff, I think, it feels like Doctor Who to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think Doctor Who's very good at being derivative. This kind of comes into a big point that I have. Can I do that, or shall I wait until?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, okay. Well, then up until Rogue, I'd been waiting for an episode that felt like a thesis statement.
Yeah. About
what the show is and does now. How it functions thematically and structurally, its place in the oversaturated television market, how it uses characters and to what ends. There are sort of two indicators for that kind of thing. A finale, or in RTD's case, the first part of a two-part finale.
Yeah.
Which will set in stone the thesis of RTD2, of course. So I'm looking forward to that. And the big guest episode. So, looking specifically at Doctor's first seasons, I think Moffat's Doctor Dances, Tom McRae's Sideman two-parter, Simon Nye's Amy's Choice, Peter Harness's Kill the Moon, and Pete McSty's Kablam are my examples of this. I feel that they nail down the fundamental, the core concepts, the core feelings of their seasons. Finales, or first parts of finales, are great touchstones for how the show deals with its most explosive ideas and emotions. Big guest episodes, however, by which I mean stories that are important to thematic, emotional, ideological functions of the season, but are told by writers other than the showrunner, are the touchstone for the overall feeling of an era that Doctor Who is trying to create. So this episode, the sort of the textual texture of Rogue, I'd say it boils down to a few important notes. The first and foremost is that divisive C word. It's camp. It's flamboyant, exaggerated, theatrical, colourful, to a degree that might make certain viewers uncomfortable. It's camp throughout.
Yeah.
And we don't take a single wellness break from the camp. Secondly, it's queer. We open with a dialogue implying a homoerotic affair. Queerness is floated already before we even meet Rogue. The episode is upfront and completely unapologetically announcing that Doctor Who, the show and the character, is queer. Thirdly, and lastly, because I could bang on forever about these things, is that it's derivative, and this is what we were talking about. There are positive and negative connotations associated with that word, and I think both are true in this case. Doctor Who in 2024 is derivative of itself in 2006, and it's derivative of other television. And those things are fine. The show's 60 years old, of course, it's going to take cues from itself. Why would it not? But right now, the show is somewhat floundering and finding its feet among, other major players in this oversaturated industry. So yes, it's going to overtly reap from Bridgerton and Black Mirror and other more successful streaming series of the 2020s with its own unique twists. It gets to do traditional Doctor Who elements like sci-fi in places where sci-fi doesn't normally belong. And now, and this is actually new ground for the show, with an overtly queer lens.
Yeah, I think that's very true. It's interesting. How do you distinguish, like, why does the show being derivative work and not kind of collapse the show from the inside? What is it? Because I think Doctor Who can do this. Why can it be derivative and it still kind of work in a novel way and it continues on through the decades just fine? Whereas, if other shows are copying from those around them, they tend to just collapse. What is it about Doctor Who that lets it be derivative in this way?
It's not quite like any other show, is it? It's sort of, it can be, gonna sound like R2D here, I don't know, but it can be anything, and it is, not it is, because it can be anything, you can't say that it is anything, but it can be, and I think at the moment, in season 1 at least, is anthological. And when you do an anthology drama like this, if the Bridgerton episode doesn't work for you, the Black Mirror episode might. And if the Black Mirror episode doesn't work for you, then the Welsh folk horror episode might. And if that doesn't work for you, then the Space Babies sci-fi camp episode might. Do you see what I mean? So I think Doctor Who's kind of explore all of these things and to play with other TV formula, because there is no set formula, especially now.
I think you've got it. It's that it is very derivative. But one, it's derivative of different things, and two, it's derivative of different things quickly. It's not totally, I mean, classic Who sometimes, but it's new Who tends to not settle in. Like, it might do a super derivative episode of one thing, but then the next week it's doing a super derivative thing of another thing. Yeah, I think that kind of solves it. Yeah. And I think areas where, actually, for classic Who, I don't know why this is, but I felt like it worked better when it was, maybe it's because, like, classic Who, when it was, feeling very Douglas Adamsy, it was because Douglas Adams was doing it, which is kind of, feels like a different thing. And New Who, I feel like sometimes when it settles on a certain derivative, quality for a while in a row, it feels weird. But whenever it's sparking off, like Series 2 in 2006, I don't love that series, but it's, Tooth and Claw is the most insane shit. It's mashing up all the weirdest stuff you can imagine. And then the next week is completely different. And then the week after it's completely different. A lot of these episodes are very copycatty. Like Girl from the Fireplace, I assume Moff just read Time Traveler's Wife and, went off to, copy a lot of it. But then the week after that has got nothing to do with Moffat or Time Traveler's Wife or anything. And so even if the week after it was even more derivative, it's fine because it's copying something else. Yeah, I think that kind of cracks it. What did you think of the covers in the episode, the musical covers?
Yeah, there's two that I can recall. It was Bad Guy by Billie Eilish and
Poker Face? Yeah.
Poker Face by Lady Gaga. And I think, were there others? If there were, I didn't catch them.
I didn't catch them either, if there were more.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's, I get the idea. I know that Bridgerton uses that, doesn't it? Bridgerton, incorporates, like pop kind of anthems, and.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Georgianifies them. I like that. I think it, I don't know that there's, maybe you have much more to say about it than I do. I don't know that there's really much to say about it. I think what that's doing really more than anything is like being Bridgerton, isn't it? It's not necessarily that, Bad Guy really is particularly doing anything. I think the idea of Bad Guy is kind of what it says in the tin. And I think, Poker Face, there's something, I don't know, I can't remember what it was that you spoke about this on. It was, RTD's, quote about, Pop being, it must have been the giggle.
Yes. Pop being aggressive.
RTD's idea about Pop being so kind of, aggressive and violent and kind of frenetic. And that, I think that's kind of what Poker Face is doing.
Yeah.
In that scene. But that's really probably the best I can give you. I think more than, those songs doing anything, in particular for the episode, I think it's more about evoking, Bridgerton, which is fine. That's cool. I liked it. It worked for me.
Did any of the Murray scored episodes stand out to you? Murray scored music?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Loads and loads.
What bits?
In particular, the waltz in particular was so beautiful. So stunning. yeah, the waltz, and the scene in the TARDIS between the Doctor and Rogue is really, really lovely. I can't bring that to mind actually, but I can bring the waltz instantly to mind. That's probably an instant favourite from season 1.
When you say the waltz, do you mean when Rogue and 15 were dancing?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that actually is a cover as well. That's a 70s composition.
Oh, really?
From like a famous tango composer, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay, right.
I think it's a new arrangement. I don't know if Murray did it but I think that's a new arrangement of it. But yeah, that's an existing piece. It's beautiful though, isn't it? It's gorgeous.
Oh, that's interesting. I feel a bit foolish now, yeah. I hope that it's on the fabled season 1 soundtrack.
Yeah.
Well then, yeah, in that case, I have to revert to my second option there. Rogue and the Doctor in the TARDIS. I really love that scene actually. I'll talk about that scene quickly because there's a brilliant bit I love there, where Groff, he's really good, isn't he? He's really, really good. I'm really glad that they were able to get Groff for this. Groff sells that who did you lose, that moment very well, where he begins to say there was someone, and then he pauses, and then there's this, I don't know if you caught this, there's this really amazing bit of sound design. Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Who did you lose? What? You lost someone. How'd you know that? Because I know. There was... Yeah. We traveled together, we had fun, you know?
Where it's sort of what it invokes for me is like a character being, you know, when you're kind of so deep in thought about something maybe traumatic or upsetting or whatever, and you have to kind of like, you have to drag yourself quickly back, ground yourself into reality. I think that's kind of what that is invoking though. Would you agree?
Yes, it's a very human sort of moment.
Yeah, it's really, really beautiful. It's a really amazing bit of understated sound design work, and it's strange actually because it's not really something that you see Doctor Who doing often. Like in an almost cartoonish way, it's kind of telling you the way that a character's brain is working. So I really love that.
Yeah.
And Groff sells it really well. And yeah, that score overcutting Shooty, and yeah,
it's so romantic, and the strings, it's just lovely. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is lovely. Yeah, it's really, really beautiful. Yeah. I assume that's 15 and Rogue's theme.
Oh, I hope. Well, I guess they need to come back for it to count, you know, as a reprisal, but hopefully they do. Do you remember the music when Rogue sacrifices himself? It kind of shifts into this kind of peppy, happy energy after all the sad, dramatic strings, as you know. That's very propulsive too. I love that. And it gets all choral when Rogue vanishes and, you know, very high drama. I thought that was really lovely.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I hadn't really thought of it in that way. But yeah, there's quite, hopeful about that.
Well, we mentioned waltzes, which Ruby's theme is a waltz. The ending, I think my favorite versions of Ruby's theme we've heard so far are There's one in Dot and Bubble where we get like a Dot and Bubble synthy 80s-y version of it, which I just thought was like so gorgeous and fun. But then this episode, it pretty much ends with, when 15, like you're saying that Groff did the kind of, I'm gathering myself, I've lost someone, I have to muster myself up here. 15's kind of doing his version of that at the end, where he's trying to say, onwards, we're all good, everything's fine, let's march on. And Ruby's like, dude, you don't, I know you're not feeling this way, let's just hug it out, it's fine, you can be sad. The Ruby's theme we're getting there is this lovely slow version, and the birds are singing in the background. And her theme is just the perfect bit of music for longing and romance. It just all melds together so well there. Great ending.
Yeah, that's my favourite rendition of Ruby's theme so far at the end of Rogue. Yeah, probably my favourite 15 of Ruby moment. Really lovely.
That's the funny thing here with if Rogue is an episode that feels like it's invoking RTD1 in some ways, eventually we'll probably get an episode, I don't think in this era, in a later era, which is invoking Chibnall. I think he had some sort of iconic episode shapes, like the serious historical, that he did. I think those will, I think eventually someone's going to try and do a spin on one of those in a later era. And I wonder, 20 years down the line, what is it about, maybe not season 1, maybe more season 2, but this kind of second RTD era, what's going to be the thing where people go, that's not invoking RTD1, that's invoking RTD2? I think it'll be really interesting to see that in time.
Yeah, that's a great point. What do you think that could be? I guess the literal themes of RTD2 so far are sort of like family and adoption and foundness and all of that kind of thing. But I think maybe what RTD has managed to do now is place stock in queer Doctor Who, proper, as opposed to RTD1 being queer Doctor Who in kind of allusions. This is queer. This is just queer. This is Doctor Who being queer, and I think that's something maybe now that. Now that RTD has come back to the show in such a big way, it kind of it binds him to the show in many ways forever. And if he wasn't already, if he hadn't already placed his stamp on Doctor Who forever, he really has now. And I think those both the classic elements of RTD that are still around. We were talking about derivativeness, campness. Those are stamped into Doctor Who now in that way. But queerness, I think is maybe what we'll take from RTD2, because that was the first to do it. Insanely, 2024. 60 years on.
I think also, when Peter Harness was developing Kill the Moon, Stephen Moffat told him to Hinchcliffe the shit out of it. So, Peter Hinchcliffe is a really recognizable era of Doctor Who. If you're Doctor Who brained and someone tells you to make your script more Hinchcliffe, they know exactly what that means and they can go adjust the tone, to that direction. If the supernatural thing holds that RTD's doing, I mean, this isn't the most exciting, memorable thing to imagine, but I can imagine in 20 years, if someone's written a script for the Chibnall second era or whatever, and Chibnall thinks it's too sci-fi, he might say, can you RTD2 your script a bit, please? Can you make this a bit more supernatural, a bit more mysterious? Can you extract some of the science out of it, make it a little more, elusive? So it could be just a tonal genre thing even that's, distinguished from RTD1. I don't know, I'm not a fanfic person, but I saw on Unleashed the writers talking about how there's the structure to what the Groff and Shooty romance is. It's very enemies to friends. They have a meet cute. They sizzle off each other and they're antagonistic at first, and then they kind of melt for each other a bit, and then one of them sacrifices for each. It's a very, I don't think stock romance is the right thing. It reminds me of fanfic in that it's really, it's in a very heightened way playing with tropes and these really recognizable structures really, really, really quickly as well.
Yeah, I'm a real sucker for enemies to lovers, and yeah, that is an old, I say old, maybe 10 to 15 years old, fanfic, trope. Yeah. I think there's a lot of, fan fiction-y elements to this episode. I think maybe that's because of what I was saying earlier about Doctor Who now, but New Who being now so old that it's being told by fans of New Who, and it's kind of folding over itself. Yeah. I'm
sure, I don't know much about Briony, but Kate Herron, I would be stunned if they hadn't watched Torchwood, because, they were a young British, into sci-fi, this queer, there's no way you weren't watching Torchwood Series 1. I'd be stunned if she hadn't, especially when this feels like it's invoking Captain Jack Harkness, but maybe it was Briony who was bringing the Torchwood in. I don't know. Maybe both.
Can I make another point about Murray?
Yeah.
I think it's strange, actually, this one. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one, so I bring it up. Murray really takes his chance to ham up that moment where Ruby watches. Was actually quite an innocuous moment. Decides to get involved in the drama, right at the beginning, where she's watching Lord Barton and Emily run off that sort of tiff, and they're
yes,
he chases after her. Yeah, he really hams that moment up. The music swells and sort of ends on a triumphant hero note as she follows them. I was confused about that on first watch because I didn't understand why such a big deal was made of something that really amounts to very little. But I think initially I misunderstood its purpose. I think tell what you think first of that, and I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah, I don't know what he was thinking. It's not that big of a deal, is it?
I think. Exactly, yeah. I think on rewatch, what Murray is doing there is actually a storytelling beat. I think he's separating Ruby's B plot from the Doctor's A plot.
So it's like a punctuation mark. He's putting a full stop on the...
That's kind of, yeah, that was what I took from it. Yeah, it was like a big exclamation mark between Ruby going off on her own mini adventure while the Doctor is upstairs on the balcony talking to Rogue. We go from that one thing and the big swell and the climax there. And then we're onto the balcony, and then we're doing the real story of this episode.
The music right before that is what I wanted to ask you about in the Susan Twist scene. I don't know if you remember it. It's this very plucky bit of music, and it's one of those things where it tickles my brain, and my brain's going, Neo, you know this from somewhere else, but I can't. I don't know where. I can't make the neuron connection.
I'd love to play it. Sorry that I can't.
Yeah, that's one day. Maybe Gig will work it out. It's so pleasurable to make the connections, but then it's so frustrating when your brain is like, yep, you recognize this bit of music, but we're not telling you where from. And then I can't, like, there's too much, I can't, go re-listen to like 46 hours of music to try and go, oh, it was from series 3 when he did that. I'm not really complaining because often you can just outsource this and a friend or a commenter or someone can go, hey, stupid, it's from series 2, episode 9, whatever. But every now and again, I hate it when my brain makes a connection, but not enough that I can actually tell where it's from. And then sometimes it's not really from anything. In Dot and Bubble, when I talked about the music with Dilb, I was trying to say, what Murray bit of music am I connecting this to? What does this sound like? I'm sure I've heard this before. It must be from Murray. And he worked out what I was trying to remember, and it was Baba O'Reilly from The Who.
Ha! Yeah. Wow.
That a bit of the music sounded exactly the same too. So sometimes it's not even Murray Gold. There's other music in the world things can sound similar to, but we're not drenched in every piece of music ever. So sometimes the connections remain undrawn. That's also, I had a moment in the Church and Ruby Road thing where I was trying to pull connections to Heaven Sent in different scenes. And then I realized Ruby's theme actually reminds me quite a bit of some Heaven Sent music, some of the descending bits. And like we were saying, I don't think that's a connection. I just think that it's, there's only so many notes, there's only so many ways to play them. But it's just cool when you hear things, arranged in similar ways and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can hear what you're talking about. I think it's not surprising to me that you hear that in Ruby's theme, because a lot of what Murray takes from, not only in Heaven Sent, but in a lot of his work is Beethoven's 7th Symphony.
Yeah.
So that's not surprising to me.
There's a bit of music when Rogue and 15 are flirting outside, when Rogue's like the gun drawn to 15's back. And it does that kind of Ruby, Heaven Sent-y descending thing. And then has the huge flourish when the ship's revealed that I really liked too. About 12 minutes in, Rogue is one of those scores where, 73 Yards and Dot and Bubble, I love the scores to so much. They're my favorite scores because they're very it's not regular Murray. Like the 73 Yards, he's doing like a odd horror kind of thing and then a lot of guitar-y things. And Dot and Bubble is doing this crazy, synthy 80s bubbly thing. Like Space Babies and Rogue, I really like their music and I really like a lot of the arrangements. But it's a lot more, he's using the same instrumentation he tends to use. He's, back to the strings and it's the more normal sorts of arrangements, which is great, but it stands out to you when he uses instruments that he doesn't normally use, basically. Boom as well, the male choir stuff I thought was neat.
Yeah, really amazing that religious choir, yeah.
I don't know, egg on our faces in a couple of days with whatever happens with The Legend of Ruby Sunday, but depending on the villains, he could be bringing out all sorts of crazy bits of music. I don't think he would actually do this, but can you imagine him doing some harmonic minor, Egyptian sounding Insanity if Sutek comes back and it just... I can't wait.
Well, I think whether it's Sutek or not, there's pyramids there, isn't there? So there'll be some kind of Egyptian thing there, but I don't know. Yeah. I think there is definitely, I think there's definitely something going on with Sutek there. So I can see, I would be astounded if we got some Pyramids of Mars music. That would be really exciting. I'm going to rewatch those episodes the next few days, even if it's not in Legend of Ruby Sunday. I'm just yeah, me too. Pyramids of Mars is great. Anyway, who's gonna regret rewatching that? Yeah, beautiful story, great season.
There was another music thing. Oh, also every Murray finale has had really iconic music. Every Murray finale, but I mean every Murray Doctor Who finale. Series 1, hologram music at the end of Bad Wolf when Eccleston's giving his no speech. It just really memorable stuff.
Yeah, that's maybe the best, yeah.
Doomsday is one of his most iconic tracks ever. Getting the full-throated This Is Gallifrey in series, that's probably is his most iconic Doctor Who track, maybe even. Series 4, Hanging on the Tablephone, is one of his most fun pieces. Lots of cool stuff there. End of Time, Vale, and everything else he was doing. Even if the season 1 finale is the worst Russell Doctor Who finale ever, which could happen.
It could happen.
I mean, it's a hard fight to beat. End of Time, I think, is probably his worst. No, Last of the Time Lords, I hate. There's so many bad ones to choose from. It's only the giggle and parting that I love, but Murray's going to smash it out of the park no matter what Russell does.
Exactly. That's always something to look forward to, isn't it? And then we've got a whole another season with him, which is excellent.
Yeah, I'm like you in that I think we had the same thing where season 1 I was really positive about before. Kind of before, like the few months before when we started getting more influence Space Babies, I started going, what's going on here? I was so hopeful about it beforehand. And then the actual season's been a lot lumpier than I thought it would be and a lot less assured than I thought it would be. But Murray never had anything to worry about. That's why I pretty much exploded with joy when his return was announced. Everything is right with the world with him. This season's been different than what I thought it would be, but I've no complaints with him. Never. Apart from not releasing the damn soundtracks. But the actual music is always great.
Okay, what have you guys been talking about?
We insulted Shudi's acting for about 20 minutes. We talked about Murray for maybe 20 minutes. And in the middle, Tyler had a big speech, which was quite interesting. He won't repeat the whole thing now. I don't know how to rephrase that. The things I was holding off specifically, you've seen Bridgerton and we haven't, so you should be the one to talk about Bridgerton. And we haven't really discussed the Richard E. Grant doctor-y thing. Tyler and I have not seen Bridgerton. That's correct, right, Tyler?
Absolutely, yeah.
You've seen Bridgerton. Well, you've seen some of Bridgerton gig. So, oh my Bridgerton, can you unpack? Tyler, we talked a bit about how, Russell likes to link into the Doctor, even Doctor Who in general, beyond Russell, likes to link into the TV of the day. That's not always, but that's a Doctor Who-y kind of thing to do. But we haven't seen Bridgerton, so we can't really comment on its Bridgerton connections beyond the music pop covers with string quartets and whatnot. What's Bridgerton like, and how is this episode like as a link to Bridgerton?
Okay, well, with the caveat that I have a slightly sort of sideways experience of Bridgerton, so I haven't actually watched Bridgerton properly. And what I actually did first is I watched this prequel season that they did between seasons 2 and 3, which is called Queen Charlotte. And I was very interested in watching that first, not just because it's set before the main show, but because it is this very weird thing. It's by a different writer. It's by Shonda Rhimes trying to kind of retroactively justify the presence of posh black people in the background of Bridgerton and around Bridgerton. So there's this really strange kind of weird storyline, which is sort of this warped portrayal of how this society overcame racism, but just for posh people. Very strange. But that's not really that related to, I guess, the main bulk of Bridgerton. I did watch a bit of proper Bridgerton afterwards. I watched the first episode and bits and pieces of the remaining first season. And I would say, one thing that is very different about Bridgerton versus this episode of Doctor Who is that Bridgerton has a lot of sex in it, which is Doctor Who obviously does not. I was interested at the start of Rogue. Actually, there's a scene which kind of overtly alludes to sex. You dishonoured my sister here, there, and everywhere. But otherwise, I would say I suppose what's odd or unusual is that Bridgerton already feels like a pastiche of the historical period. It already feels a little bit like people doing a dress-up fantasy version of the period, people kind of going there and kind of dressing up and doing this sort of slightly distorted sort of fantasy version of history. So, there's not much in the way of, class conflict in this version of history. There's no, you don't really spend much time with, the servant class or, people outside the bubble of the Bridgerton world. It is all just kind of this hazy fantasy of, the rich girls, the posh girls, and kind of occasionally having their lives intruded upon by scandal and drama and murder and tragedy and things like that. But for the most part, it is about kind of what are the conflicts they have within their little social bubble, their little social realm. And it's about kind of the gorgeous dresses and the dances and the balls and stuff. And of course, the brooding heroes, brooding male leads who kind of have tortured souls inside. So in that sense, I guess a character like Rogue kind of slots into that world, even though he's not from it. I would say Other things, going from Bridgerton to this, I was struck by how much worse this looks than Bridgerton. It was like, oh wow, yeah, this is actually the BBC budget version. And also, I guess the other thing is that the other reason actually I watched the prequel first is that the prequel was kind of highlighted for having the first gay kind of representation, like whereas like the main Bridgerton like series doesn't really have like, much in that vein. And it is, yeah, no, that's a fair point actually, because that is one way in which it's kind of distinct. Like Bridgerton is broadly about like the girls and their male leads, or vice versa, kind of the male leads and the kind of women they find, because they're based on this series of books which are kind of about one of the Bridgerton children for each book, and the show is kind of this anthology thing where each season kind of looks at a different member of the family. So like the hot couple from season 1 of Bridgerton are absent in season 2 and 3. But yeah, I would say like this episode of Doctor Who kind of like makes a point of the gayness being a kind of an intrusion upon the Bridgerton world, which is part of why it's part of what I really like about the episode. Actually, it kind of makes a whole point of it having fun with the gayness. Because the thing about them when they do the gay dance and kind of that kind of attracts the children's attention, you could sort of do the same thing with a straight couple as long as they had a big fight in the middle of the ballroom, right? So technically it doesn't have to be gay for the story to work, but it wouldn't be as fun. So it's the fact that in kind of intruding a queer romance upon the Bridgerton setting, it is doing that and having joy in that, is reveling in that. That's kind of where the Doctor Who element of subversion comes in. So I really loved linking those two things together. I love that the Doctor Who take on Bridgerton is also the queer take on Bridgerton, and the subversion of it like that. And that's kind of that's sort of the most I really have to offer on the Bridgerton front. The only other thing I would say is that in Bridgerton kind of already being like a pastiche and kind of feeling a bit like people are going in there and dressing up rather than engaging with history in like a serious sense, and of course that extends to the weird take on racism that they do in the prequel and stuff. And it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Cholder, in that the Cholder aren't just kind of cosplaying, they're also just sort of going there and they're going to that actual place and treating it like a playground and that's kind of in a less lethal way, kind of what works like Bridgerton are kind of doing. So they're just sort of taking like a modern milieu, modern like viewers and such, and just sort of going to this theme park, if you like, version of history to play around in it. So I guess that's kind of the closest connection. You could view the Cholder as kind of a little bit of an analogue to that. There you go. Bridgerton rant finished.
The fact that the Doctor sees Rogue being a bounty hunter is cool. Before I say what I think of that, what do you guys think of that?
I think I know where you're going with this. Yeah, I don't think the Ninth Doctor would have found it cool.
Yeah, to be honest, it feels like the show is kind of self-aware about maybe the emptiness of the Doctor's moral conflicts over that stuff at this point. Like the kind of people the Doctor has fraternized with and fraternizes with. So it feels like at this point they skipped past the whole moral debate, and the Doctor is almost making a joke out of it. Like, oh yeah, it's the whole moral void, whatever. You know, we can argue about this and whether your way of life is better than mine. Whereas, in fact, he's not actually invested in that debate at all. Like, he's not really trying to set himself up morally, like, above, which I guess sits weirdly with his whole, oh, we're going to trap the monsters forever, not kill them. You know, so I think there's kind of vestiges of that weird sort of self-absorbed morality that you get with maybe the RTD1 Doctor kind of hanging around, but you also get the Doctor, I think refreshingly, I thought, just kind of not that invested in it, and just sort of saying, well, you know, you're a bounty hunter, like whatever, you know, I'm just interested in interesting people rather than trying to like preach to them.
No job, just fun.
Well, I mean, Rogue does have a job, but that's rather the difference, isn't it? But it's kind of the Doctor doesn't view it as his job to make judgments about Rogue's job.
Well, here's my take on the bounty hunter thing. It's played in such a way that you expect Doctor Who, you know Doctor Who's opinions on things, you know he's going to give Rogue a hard time about the nature of his work. And the fact that those expectations are subverted in the pause between that is so and the final landing of cool tells me that there's something different about this Doctor to the others. He doesn't deride Rogue or even denounce him like certain other Doctor Who's would. In fact, it endears 15 to him. And I think, yeah, maybe it's riffing on, you know, this character has changed and grown and seen many different people and maybe has become conscious of biases and hypocrisies and whatnot. But I think maybe when you kind of square, that's good to kind of square that with what's happened previously on this show and with this character. But when you're looking specifically at this Doctor Who, because I think this season is really asking you to, uncluster the old approach and just think about what's happening now. I think the moral, the idea behind that is the moral kind of, is it ambiguity or is it greyness? I think it's probably greyness, isn't it? To be so. I know that he gets that line a bit later about that isn't like the moral void of bounty hunters, but I think there's a slither of a touch of Doctor Who's not so anti anymore. Doctor Who's not so anti bad things like this anymore, and. I don't know, it chimes weirdly to me unless I see it as, because it's unlike him not to get on his soapbox about the moral cause for not killing people, and he initially, tried it with a song for this. And maybe it's because we haven't actually seen him in action, much, so far, but other than in Church on Ruby Road, I think he's basically either not been present or ran away, and I think, based on what we have had, I think there's a moral ambiguity to this Doctor, because he's either one of two things. He's either constantly has like a huge sense of urgency and personal like a sort of personal, like a debt to the lives of others, and like a hugely kind of empathetic reaction to everything, or quite an unempathetic, almost like a thoughtlessness, I don't want to say naivety, because that kind of takes away from the like, that kind of makes the character quite passive. There's what word am I looking for? Can somebody help me here? It's not thoughtlessness, it's like a throwing away of, well, like a sort of laissez-faire kind of attitude towards
flippancy, like.
Yeah, sure, yeah. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah, see, you mentioned he chided Riversong for it, like, initially. And I think where he ultimately landed with Riversong, like in Husband, for example, like, I mean, River's doing her whole thing, but there's a sheen of, well, this is fine because it's just bad people I'm going after as well. So 12 didn't really care in the end. Like, oh, well, who cares about those guys? Whatever. They're the scum of society. I don't mind if River, like, blows them up or shoots them or kills them or whatever. So it almost, this whole thing almost feels a little bit post-Moffat to me, in that the Doctor kind of, like that ambiguity that the Doctor sits within is sort of related to, I guess, the Doctor's own conduct almost. Like, the Doctor has been a killer. The Doctor is kind of self-aware about that. The Doctor kind of knows that. So it's like, well, at what point does that initial chiding of River, I mean, in the same sense as that went away eventually, maybe it's just not here to start with. Like, I mean, you're right. Like, 15 does clearly demonstrate like a firmness of purpose at times. Like, I've got to kill these goblins. But other times he's sort of more led by, what's cool, what's what's exciting, what's so it's I guess, I mean, and of course in this story he seems, once he feels that the monsters have got Ruby, he's like, I'm going to make them suffer, I'm going to punish these guys, I'm going to be judge, jury and executioner. So I guess, actually, and now I think about it, the goblins were the same, weren't they? Because they erased Ruby from time. So maybe it's just if you hurt his companion, then he goes after you with, the fury of 1,000 suns. But otherwise, he's like, well, whatever. So I do feel maybe it's part of the whole bi-generated thing. Like, I've left my Tennant era, kind of RTD1 era, Moff era angst behind me, and I just sort of don't enter with as much judgmentalness, at least when it comes to people who I want to flirt with. Maybe that's just it. Maybe he's just selfish.
Well, the only other things I've got before I go then are they're just like a handful of notes on lines that I liked and sort of character moments that I liked. I really, really love, I think it's so important, I really wanted to draw attention to this, Millie's muted, really crushing delivery of "No Doctor, it's fine." That's such a really wonderful performance of a kind of what I see as a bit of an unearned moment in the script. She really owns that. It's really amazing. I really love India of Armour. I've seen her in quite a few things, and I think every time she really blows me away, and this was just another example of that. I really love that line, 1/3 of a brain Doctor. I love the way she looks that. So interesting. So sort of keyed into what that character is. And yeah, the other one I had actually was that two-hander cold open. The I'd rather be you is so camply menacing, and it really understands the tone of the episode. To be honest, better than the actor who takes over as that character. I really, really loved that. And that's really, I think, all I've got.
Yeah, one little thing I loved is when Ncuti did the Missy voice, which I've realised that's what it is. When he's talking to Rogue in the ship, is that a smile from the most serious man? I kept thinking, like, what is that voice he's doing?
Yeah.
Oh, right, that's the mocking voice that Missy would do whenever she was, like, about to kill someone. I was like, oh my god, yes. So that feels like a lovely bit of, like, I guess, like, mutual Scottish, like, transference there. That was lovely.
Yeah.
And again, yeah, totally agreed about Millie. She always finds a way to steal, like, the show in what is notionally another actor's big moment. She'll do something very small. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just focusing on Millie here.
So the Richard E. Grant scene. So this big scene where, you know, people were hyping this up, all the fans are going to react to this one because it's a Doctor montage scene. It starts off with 15 having a blue 15 face next to him, then a blue Tennant face, and then we go through a whole series of faces. Of course, one of them is Joe Martin, who's, you know, the Doctor, and so that's interesting to see. There's a mystery face that's hard to discern. I thought it was Jeffrey Bayldon, which I don't know if many... He was a big actor back in the day. He was in, Catweasel. He was in lots of things. For Doctor Who, he did some of the Unbound audios where he played a version of the first Doctor that never left Gallifrey, you know, with Carol Ann Ford. Well, that relates to as Susan... But I thought the face was, and I thought that is so weird. I know there were reviews kind of talking like there's a weird lore thing in this episode. Do they really just have a Unbound Big Finish Doctor on screen? Probably not. I'm just going to keep watching the episode and then I'll see what fans said after it. And then I did see what fans said after it, and they said that's Richard E. Grant. Richard E. Grant, interesting guy. He's been in Doctor Who a lot. He was the Great Intelligence in Series 7, and you know that was the whole arc of the day. And he's also played the Doctor more than once. In Stephen Moffat's great Curse of Fatal Death 90s comedy skit, he's one of the big Doctors in that. And then he also played the Doctor he was very briefly Paul McGann's successor. This was a real era. There's a very small amount of Doctor Who magazine issues where Richard E. Grant was the actual Doctor of the day. Scream of the Shalka was like Paul Cornell wrote it. James Goss was involved. I don't really know how to describe it. It's not, it's interesting. It's a cartoon, so Richard E. Grant just does the voice, and his performance is, like, Tyler and I had a big talk in this discussion about, isn't it amazing how some Doctor actors can just take over the show? And it's quite brutal. Like, it's not always even a good thing. Like, Tom Baker would just wrestle some scripts from the writers, wouldn't he? And he made his own come hell or high water. You know, Matt was very good with dialogue with that. Richard E. Grant kind of tried the opposite tactic, which is, what if I give the most boring, unenthused performance as possible? What will that do to Cornell's script? Even Russell T Davies himself kind of bagged out Richard E. Grant's performance in Scream with the Shalka back in the day. And so it's one of those weird things where I actually think some of the writing of Scream with the Shalka is quite cool. This like alternate Ninth Doctor thing where the Doctor has like Derek Jacobi master android like in the TARDIS, and like there's been like a big Time War-y tragedy with the Time Lords or something. Like it's a pretty interesting little setup for Doctor Who. But Richard E. Grant's performance in it is so bad, in my opinion, so dull, that when I saw Richard E. Grant's face in this merry-go-round, and when I saw fans say it was his face, I thought, isn't that cool? Because like that could be the comedy Moffat Richard E. Grant, or that could be the cartoon Paul Cornell Shalka Richard E. Grant. We'll get into something else to do with that in a second. But yeah, what did you think of Richard E. Grant's face and that scene in general?
Yeah, I felt a bit weird because I've always jokingly liked the idea that in some like completely unreconcilable, intangible way, you could jokingly treat Shalka as canon. Like when I'm in Time of the Doctor, 11 mentions like inventing an android boyfriend or something. I always just relate that to the Jacobi master in my head. But it's not the sort of thing that I would want like the show to take seriously or try to like do like a real thing, because at the end of the day it's like, well, why try and press it all down into text and make it real? So like stuff like this, I mean, I don't care about this to be honest. Not so that this is not like a shut down discussion sort of thing. I just find that it's the sort of thing that gets really overhyped by fans, but it's not actually consequential. Like it doesn't actually matter. Like this has not actually changed history. This has not really changed how we see the history of the show very much, and it's not going to lead into some big story arc about Shalka, Scream of the Shalka. It's not going to, BBC, a new remastered release of Scream of the Shalka, or Shalka turns up in season 15. No, none of that's going to happen. So it is quite inconsequential. I see, when that sequence was going on, I was expecting Morbius Doctors, more Chib kind of stuff. That's what I was expecting. So it was very out of left field for it to suddenly be to be virtually none of that. Obviously, Fugitive is in there, but none of the Timeless Child stuff, none of the Morbius stuff is in there, and it's just Shalka instead. So it felt like a quite small thing to suddenly acknowledge, because Shalka is pretty inconsequential in the wider scheme of things. Like, obviously, I mean, literally, it was sort of like the false start of the revival, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's to such an extent that it just got ignored. Like, the TV movie didn't get ignored, but Shalka did get ignored. Like, that was something that tried to be the revival of Doctor Who and then was denied that right. It was retroactively said, no, that's not the revival. This is the next official Doctor. So yeah, so it's kind of like a consolation prize for Shalka. It gets referenced in a new episode, but not actually a big law-changing thing, in my opinion. I mean, at the end of the day, the Toymaker said his whole, "I made a jigsaw out of your history, so now you can just shove in anything you want," and that's about as much as it matters.
The jigsaw thing, you'll probably think less of me for this. I'm sure you've heard this from me before. But you know when people are like, really, like one line of an episode made you enjoy something now? Like you couldn't enjoy Scream of the Shalka unless the show gave you like one line saying, well, actually it happened in a parallel timeline. You know how, stupid, we tend to find that sort of thing. You really needed a line of dialogue to give you permission to enjoy something. The jigsaw history kind of did give me, like, I find it so much easier to roll with the timeless stuff and a lot of other things since Neil Patrick Harris told David Tennant the jigsaw thing. I clown on people for, you don't need the TARDIS wiki to give you permission to enjoy the EDAs doing so-and-so. You can just enjoy it. But I don't know. I do like the permission that that line gives me. That line did actually help me. So thanks, Russell.
I think the ambiguity of that line helps, because the Toymaker didn't specifically say, I invented this parallel timeline where the time the child happened and I inserted Shalka here and I did it. No, he just says, I fucked around with it. I made it messy. Yeah. And then you don't know how. We're not going to explain how. We're just going to treat this ambiguity about history as the status quo moving forward. So that kind of gives you, maybe permission is the wrong, well, actually, maybe it is permission. Just like a liberty to interpret it however you want. Yeah. And it's saying and embracing that fluidity of people's different interpretations and not really going with one or the other. So it is, we talked a lot, I guess, in the early RTD2 stuff about, are you introducing freedom? Are you actually making the show freer? Are you actually opening space by doing all this stuff? How much are you actually doing that? I guess this is an example of, I guess that is kind of a real thing, not because it's actually materially changing the show or this, but because it's saying, it's like a statement of intent, like this is how, like RTD2 is working. Yeah. So as you watch new episodes of RTD2, you know that's how they're working because it told you, right? So you don't actually have to watch Richard E. Grant on screen and go, this is like, oh my god, this is an attack on lore, because you know it isn't an attack on lore at all.
I've actually, on that note, there's something I do like about his face. I don't mean like aesthetically. I mean, well, okay. Something I do like about his face showing up is that people, like, this sounds silly now, we're talking about Morbius Doctors and stuff, but back in 2007, was it 2007? Yeah, 2007, it was a big deal to get Paul McGann's face in the Human Nature journals. That David Tennant was, like, people were trying to, in Queer as Folk, Russell T Davis's own show, it said that Paul McGann doesn't count. That was a real thing, Paul McGann not counting. That was an actual issue back in the day. It was a big deal when his face was on the Human Nature Family of Blood journals. And then it was a big deal when he was on the cyber recording tube thing in The Next Doctor. It felt like a big deal to get an actual, real TV movie Doctor acknowledged. And it's like, it makes that feel quaint in a nice way now that now we're getting Shalka acknowledged. And it's like the show is so much more open and fluid with, they're a Doctor. Yeah, they're a Doctor. And you can say that's devaluing it. And I think I do actually think there's some merit to that. And I would have said it a couple of years ago. But I find there's a kind of joy in it now going like, hell yeah, he was a Doctor. Remember when he did that weird little cartoon thing? He's a Doctor. Let's put him on screen. I kind of like that now. It's very, but we're on like on 15 real Doctors at this point. It's kind of like there's less of a sanctity and there's more of a kind of playfulness now with, yes, Jo Martin, she didn't really have her own era, but she's a Doctor. That's cool. And Richard E. Grant he kind of had his own era and he was a Doctor. Peter Cushing was a Doctor. I kind of like that now. Like, I feel like if we're going to tear the Band-Aid off, it's kind of fun to just go full bore with, yes, they were doctors. Doctors all around.
And I suppose what is nice about it is that it puts the attention on what materially happened. Like, in the real world, Richard E. Grant played the Doctor in this amount of audio. You might not have thought it was very good, or whatever, but it still happened, right? So, and I guess in acknowledging that in the show, it is keeping the attention on the actual history of the show rather than the fictitious history of this character.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So like, because the latter is kind of, it's this abstract thing, and it's this very relitigated thing, and it's all about how are we doing this and how are we doing that, and it's not even a fixed constant thing. Whereas it is a permanent fact that Richard E. Grant did in fact play the Doctor at one point. So it is a nice thing to actually keep a focus on the material.
And I think Shooty of all Doctors is such a, like, he wrestled the show away from David Tennant easily, you know, in The Giggle. He's a kind of Doctor where, I remember when Jodie was the Doctor, I actually don't think this was like a performance thing as much as like the way the show was operating, and not entirely Chibnall's fault. There were, you know, extra factors there as well. But like in those days, it felt a bit weird when like David Tennant was leading the EU comics and audios and everything, and like, hey guys, Jodie's the Doctor. Shooty, I feel like it's both the way RTD's positioned the show and his very kind of forceful acting has kind of made it like, I feel like he's the kind of Doctor you can throw up other Doctors all around, and it's never like the 14th Doctor is like the explication of this. Shooty's the Doctor for real. Like, we can bring up as many other Doctors as we want, and it doesn't feel like it's interrupting him at all, because we literally have another Doctor parked, you know, in France right now, and it's totally fine. So, do you get what I'm kind of saying there? I don't feel like there's any interruptions with throwing up all these other Doctors around him.
Yeah, I mean, 15 is a very... 15 announces himself so much like as a Doctor. He's such a distinct style in terms of how that character is represented on screen. He has so many like specific things to his identity, like how he feels, looks, behaves, like even speaks. Like it's just the idea that putting like other Doctors around him would like blur the lines or make him fade into the background is just not going to happen. It would never happen. Physically impossible. I can't say that about every Doctor, unfortunately.
Yeah.
15 is not one who would ever be I guess drowned out by surrounding Doctorness.
The way Richard E. Grant was literally drowned out.
Yeah.
I think there were 3 issues of Doctor Who magazine, where he was like the contemporary Doctor. What a little era that was. Even 14 got like a ton. Anyway, my only other thing on that Richard E. Grant scene is Twitter. So someone who worked on the VFX, of season 1 has been twittering around. And that's great. I love it when people involved in the show actually interact on social media, because there's never a dull moment when that happens. And so this person worked some of the VFX, and so they were in the room, they did some stuff, they know some of the conversations that were happening around this stuff. They later got promoted to special effects artists, so they were talking with the producers for all this sorts of stuff. And so they got involved in some interesting happenings. One thing they had to say is they're talking about, okay, so they made a joke to their producer about whether like the Richard E. Grant was Shalka or whether Curse of Fatal Death was canon now or not. Then they made a lot of follow-up tweets because a lot of people went at them both in positive and negative ways about what they were talking about. To clarify, asking their producer if Curse of Fatal Death was canon was a jokey comment they wanted to share with Doctor Who Twitter. They talked about it's hard to fit all Doctor faces into a shot that they were doing. Some people were very angry that Tennant was on screen, twice. He had 2 faces there for 10 and 14, and he was on screen, the longest time. And so they kind of explained Tennant was an available image for look dev, recognizable Doctor. It was easier to remain as the starter image as all the Doctors appeared in a random order. There's story reasons, but there's also this dude's popular, I guess, Tennant's most readily available image, that sort of thing. This VFX person said, everyone who got mad over Ten's face lingering too long, stay mad. He's probably the most recognizable face for a wide audience. We got all the Doctors and then some. I'm totally on their side there. Yes, that's an objective truth. At least to New Who, Disney Who fans, Tennant's the most recognizable one, and all Doctor faces and more appeared. What's the complaint? Did you want Pert to be up there for longer? You got every face. What's the issue?
I mean, clearly the source of the upset there is not that his face was there, but that Tennant was 2 Doctors, right? No, he gets to have 2 ice creams. It's not fair. Yeah, that's basically all it is.
Yeah, they said, so they had the Tennant image, because it's the 10th Doctor's face we see first. We see 14th Doctor's face. I think it's from the Giggle later in the sequence. They said, we had the image for look dev, I assume that means look development as like a VFX thing. Nearly swapped it out and then didn't for various reasons, including 10's popularity. It's not that deep. It's fine. We also used that pick to look dev the holograms, and then it was just kept there because it was easy and way more people know who 10 is. It ain't that deep, man. They have a few other tweets on that sort of thing.
This feels like too much explanation for something that is very self-evident and small. Like, oh my god, who cares? And clearly people do care, but yeah, I feel like indulging them to that extent is maybe unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm totally on the VFX person's side, but I just feel these people can't be reasoned with. You know, it's kind of a losing battle. I did think the Richard E. Grant thing was interesting. So yeah, I was having a joke with my producer. Neither of us knew what version of Richard E. Grant was being made canon when we were told it was him being added, and why would we? So I wasn't mistaken at all. I was having fun at my job. I love that. So we were told it was him being added. So it's not like I've seen some people misinterpret it as like the VFX people playing a joke, putting him in there. But you know, clearly that comes from above. What faces to put in. You can't go rogue and, you know, put in Peter Cushing without the rights or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's very clearly like a, you know, RTD level decision.
Yeah.
Even if it's not like him, like exclusively, you know, there's a whole, like, we want to encourage like a more diverse or inclusive approach to Doctor Who history. So put in Shalka, you know, it's not just a VFX tweak here. It's very in line with the RTD2 ethos. They
also alluded to, apparently other extra Doctors were considered, but they say they can't really go into that. And here is the really interesting thing to me is that that image of Richard E. Grant, obviously Screamer of Shalka is a cartoon, so you can't really use that image. But it's not an image of him from another, like the image of Pertwee's from Dimensions in Time, not like real Doctor Who. Can I say that? It's sure, it's real Doctor Who. It's as real as anything. But the image of Richard E. Grant is new from this VFX producer going and doing a photo shoot with Richard E. Grant to get some new Shalka Doctor photos, which this VFX person says you're not going to see the other photos, but that's pretty interesting to, you know, all these years later, because Shalka was for 2003 for the 40th that Richard he's getting his first photos in character. Maybe that's interesting stuff.
I mean, they just needed his head, I suppose. I wonder if they even told him what it was for. Like, hey, so with the BBC, we just need some pictures of your head right now. Like, you know, just a casual thing. You know, don't ask what we're going to use them for. It's all good.
It's interesting that we're reading so much into this, but it's Richard E. Grant's current face.
Yeah.
So in Shalka, is the Shalka canon that he's meant to look as Richard E. Grant looks now, or as Richard E. Grant looked in 2000? Who knows, or who cares even? I care a little bit, so it's interesting stuff.
And you could say, what if Shalka Doctor just lived on and got really old eventually, and this is a picture of Shalka Doctor later in life?
I like a lot of Shalka. I think Cornell did actually some really interesting stuff with what he was doing there. I don't mind a little Shalka resurgence. I just hope if Richard E. Grant ever does it again that he cares a bit this time. I thought he was fine in series. Well, actually, he was a bit stiff in series. It's so odd because he's...
I mean, he's playing like this... he's a great intelligence, right? This thing... It's kind of a weird kind of character. There's sort of a ranting villain and sort of also an emotionless husk. It's just very odd kind of position to be in.
It's weird because he's quite he's a kind of vivacious man in some ways. Like, he's not a cold, unfeeling person, the actor himself. Like, remember that Star Wars Rise of the Skywalker thing when he was extremely animated?
I've just seen Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, and nothing prepares you for this. I cheered, I shouted, I fist pumped the air, I cried, I stood and cheered. It's absolutely everything that you hoped it was going to be. I'm so proud to be in it, and I can't wait for you to see it.
But all these Doctor Who performances are very, like, cold. Like the Shalka thing, I think he's just... It sounds like he was cold reading it or something. I don't know what was going on there. Great intelligence, the character's very stiff, and so he played it very stiff. Yeah, it's just a weird... He's not doing what he often does in there. But anyway, it's Shooty's era, not Shalka's era. So the other thing I had to chase up before you have any final stuff is... I talked through most of the music I wanted with Tyler. There's a few little bits I'd just like you to say if you have any thoughts on.
Okay, sure.
One of them's above there. When we see the Susan twist of this episode, I just think that music's kind of interesting, and I feel like I know it from somewhere. I don't know if Tyler couldn't recognize it. I don't know if you can, but it's an interesting bit of music. Let's have a listen.
can't say I recognise it, but it does feel familiar. Like, I see why you feel like you've heard it somewhere before. It just feels like I guess the techniques that Gold's using there feel like ones that he has used like at certain points. Like it just feels like it's playing in that zone. Yeah, it feels familiar with him.
Yeah, the mystery little tinkle. Yeah. Maybe it's set up for like a Susan Twist theme.
Quite possibly. In
the next episode, Sutek's Resurgence or whatever it's called. But yeah, we'll see soon. Another little bit of music is in the Shalka scene. It's weird because I thought we'd get like a big This Is Gallifrey or something because he's like, or even like, the much bigger bang in the Boom where we get like a pretty, it's a song kind of subdued, but it's still 15's epic theme. But listen to the music in the I'm the Doctor, Lord of Time scene because it's not what I expected from this sort of scene.
It's sort of like it goes from an alternate universe version of, This Is Gallifrey or Trenzalore into an alternate universe version of Strange Creatures. It's almost like we're doing the slightly misremembered Gold nostalgia from one to the other. Yeah. I guess like when we talked about in Space Babies how the old themes come back for a bit and then we kind of divert away from them.
Yeah.
I guess maybe this is part of that, just kind of not bringing back the old themes all the time. Like we can evoke the general mood of them without actually doing the themes themselves.
Yeah. I guess the Series 7 moment when we get the really sad version of This Is Gallifrey probably wouldn't have hit as hard if every Series 5 and Series 6 moment that invoked like Time Lords used This Is Gallifrey again. So I guess it's kind of keeping some juice in the tank to, yeah, it makes sense. And the other outlying bit of music I have is when Rogue does his surprise proposal to 15, the music that, and then when like the birds are running around outside right after that. Yeah, have a listen. See what you think of this.
I really loved what happened during the proposal there. I think a different music there could have changed it completely, because I think you could easily, you could erroneously mistake that whole bit with the ring proposal as just part of the act and not really meant to be looked at on another level at all. But I think what they're trying to go for with that scene is that there's something subtextual happening, which is that, I mean, like with when the Doctor's like, "Oh, you asked me to give up my fortune, my title," that is kind of, I think that is kind of an analog with Rogue sort of suggesting to the Doctor, you could throw this all away, travel with me instead of me traveling with you.
Yeah.
So it's kind of alluding to that, like what is actually happening between them, even though they're doing like a performance, to attract the Cholder. So I think when he actually busts out the ring, I think the Doctor's reaction there is kind of sincere, like, "Oh shit, actually, this is realer than I, imagined." Which is kind of, he seems so, he doesn't have a response there, and I think, and I love the music being so really quite poignant there, all of a sudden, and just suddenly feeling very real. Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. I think the music is kind of key to that working almost, because the Doctor's so kind of monosyllabic in his reaction.
Yeah. It's a great scene. What do you make of Rogue kind of stammering and not actually having any like dialogue to share back to 15 in that scene? What's going on with him?
Well, I think it's like he says earlier, the Cholder cosplay, not me. Like, Rogue isn't actually like this badass, wisecracking, quipping, like a cool guy. I mean, he's a bit of a nerd. He's a hermit. He's He's a loner, and in the kind of the sad way, he's lonely, and he's awkward, right? Which is kind of why it's the whole inversion of the 9 and Jack thing.
Yeah.
You know, where 15 is the actual, the brash, kind of cool guy. And so I guess, like, it's, you know, he does not slot in to, like, a scenario the way the Doctor can. He does not immediately have the chameleonic, like, social graces of the Doctor.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, they're going for the whole opposite attract thing, aren't they? So, you know, he's meant to be like the inverse of the Doctor anyway. So he's not gonna, you know, he doesn't, I think it's, and I think what I like about that is just sort of showing that it's just the vulnerability, isn't it, at the end of the day? So having like the cool, handsome bounty hunter who is actually not actually that cool at the end of the day, it's just the gap.
Yeah.
Now, I thought it was interesting that the Doctor's line about Rogue when he says, "Oh, bounty hunter, you're catching monsters and getting into scrapes." They used that for the trailer.
Yeah.
And they kind of made it sound like it was about the Doctor, but it's actually just about Rogue being a bounty hunter. So, yeah, kind of just the way that just almost not even intentionally ends up being, I guess, blurring the lines between the two. So again, which kind of, I guess, plays into what we were talking about with Tyler about how the Doctor isn't that judgmental of Rogue for what he does, because at the end of the day, maybe you can liken it to what the Doctor does in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I love when trailer lines aren't what you expect. I think in Boom, I was like disappointed because Boom, like the trailer for season 1, kind of tweaked the bigger bang than you bargain for speech in a slightly different way than it's cut in the episode. And then the episode I was kind of disappointed. Oh, that sounded more epic in the trailer. But I really like this kind of, it's the thing that fans in 40 years won't get. Like I have no idea how I guess Classic was a very different era. I don't know how the advertising was working for it and so what reframe things Classic fans got. But it's a cool thing when you live through an era to kind of experience that stuff, I think. We're speaking now the finale's already happened by the time we're talking now. This is a bit of a flash forward. In the actual discussion, mostly in the parts you were dipping out for a little moment, Tyler and I had lots of predictions about the finale, which eventuated in interesting ways. Anyway, talking about Rogue, an article, the SFX July science fiction magazine of 2024 has come out, which has shed a bit more light on some of the stuff we talked about a lot with Rogue. I think you've already seen this, but it's worth talking through just a teeny bit. Some of the Richard E. Grant material. You know what I'm talking about?
Ah, yes, the Dimensions in Time head.
So, in SFX, what Russell said about the cameo was that it was... Russell says, I wrote to Paul Cornell the night before saying, please watch tomorrow because there's such a treat in store. And he was so delighted. But it's really nice when you can do things like that. That was a really nice moment between me and Paul. We're old friends going back decades. So that's the first little bit of info.
Okay. I'm sort of... I don't know if I'm surprised or not surprised that it's kind of a specifically Paul Cornell-oriented thing. I suppose it's a... So it's not just kind of like a continuity wank thing. There is a personal connection there, I guess, because, you know, Paul wrote for the show once upon a time, sort of.
And he tried to again and again and again, as his emails tell me all the time. Anyway, I don't get personal emails. He does an email newsletter, which he kind of staggered out, revealing his failed Doctor Who pitches over the years. There were some interesting ones, Pride, Prejudice, Daleks, I think, vampire stuff. Anyway, we have new writers now, like Kate and Briony. On that note, Russell says, it was lovely, a little bit of payment there because he, Paul, created the 9th Doctor with the Shalka, and we completely replaced him with Christopher Eccleston as the Doctor. So how nice all these years later to take a little lean back and sort of say, the door's open now, thanks to the timeless child. And you can come in and own your Doctor again. Really, it's not just fun, it's a nice thing to do.
So how do you think the timeless child contributes to
all stories are true, Gig. All stories are true.
And what part of the timeless child actually suggested that all stories were true? Like which bit, which scene?
Well, the brain of Morbius is now true.
I thought it was already true.
It's truer now. We saw it on TV again. That makes it more true.
You know, joking aside, because obviously the strange part of that statement would seem to be that since the timeless child was about pre-Hartnell Doctors supposedly all being true, you know, this kind of slightly off interpretation that RTD has promoted of it, which is that, oh, everything is true now, kind of seems to be kind of bending the truth slightly. But I think what he's actually really getting at when he says this stuff is not so much that Chib has unleashed infinite pre-Hartnell Doctors and now Shalka is a pre-Hartnell Doctor, because I don't think that's the implication. but rather that now that the Timeless Children has happened and Chibnall has sort of unleashed this huge dump thing that is just so weird and strangely banal that no one can really be asked to care about it very much. It's more that no one cares at all. Like, no one can be bothered to care anymore. Caring is too much effort. Trying to put the Doctor's history together. I mean, this is why we get the whole "I made a jigsaw out of your history, Doctor" from the Toymaker. Yeah. Almost to basically try and cover up the weird, strange kind of psychic violence enacted upon the meta plot of Doctor Who by all of these twists by just saying, oh, well, who cares anymore? It's all just a big mess. Stop thinking about it, basically. Stop thinking about it, I think is basically the idea there. And indeed, with Shalka, I suppose the whole thing is it's not tied up. Obviously, this is two competing visions of what the Ninth Doctor is. They don't actually slot together into a convenient little timeline. And that's fair enough. I think that's completely fine. So, it's a fun thing to acknowledge. I think it's just worth keeping in mind that when RTD invokes the Timeless Children, it's not actually the specific Timeless Child revelations. It's just the really point-defeating, kind of thought-defeating attitude towards, I guess, the Doctor's personal history.
It's very interesting to watch this in the moment. I remember there's a recording of us along with 3 other people reacting with psychic violence when the Timeless Children first aired. But over the years, I don't know if settled the right word. We've resigned. As with any fan, our relationship with it changes as the show marches on. I really like what you're saying, that people care less about a certain thing now. This sounds very ugly the way we're saying it, but this is how everything's always worked. Like in Star Wars, I'm sure there was a time where people cared a lot about, wait, aren't the desert robes, that's a thing from the desert planet. That's not the Jedi don't just wear desert robes. I'm sure there was a time when people cared about that a lot more. But how can you even care about that now? You're fighting like with the tiny 1% of the era of the whole franchise, and then all the visuals of the rest of the era are screaming something else at you. What can you do in that situation? I think there was a time where regeneration wasn't regeneration. That's really a JNT era thing that it got kind of formalized and homogenized into kind of what we know it as now. There was a time where so many things were different. And I think you can do a kind of poetic thing, but, that we knitted things together and then it all worked in this way. Or you can kind of say the other way around, which is the show kind of brutalized a canon onto a mystery before, and so we just rolled with it. I think you can say that for regeneration, and we tend to generally like how regeneration works, these days. And it used to be a much more open thing, and then it got kind of narrowed down. I think there's something to... we're not necessarily just saying the Timeless Child is a terrible episode and did terrible things by like saying, no, we don't care so much about there being crazy doctors all over the place. But I think it's kind of a function long-term on the fandom to kind of relax your I feel like I'm not even trying to be diplomatic how I'm saying this. Do you get what I'm saying? I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, I think as time goes on, I think the significance of things fades, and it's more that... Yeah. I think like really important stories that people actually care about, that actually matter to people, like they cast a shadow, they loom, they last, people keep thinking about them. But an episode like The Timeless Children, I'd say the opposite happens. People cease to give a shit in the end. I would say maybe I'd disagree with RTD slightly, which is that something like playing with what is true and including Shalka in the lineup of Doctors, you don't actually need Timeless Children to do that, because I think in a way the Doctor's history kind of already worked in that slightly apocryphal way, where the vagueness was kind of part of the fun, and that and time being this thing that isn't quite linear. I think that was also kind of established in a way. It was something that was kind of... I think people could have absorbed it. You didn't actually need, timeless revelations and the Doctor as a different species to, sort all of that out. I guess certainly, in a way, almost to help that process of fading away the timeless revelations into obscurity, I think increasing the messiness is kind of almost a strategy you might use in that respect. Yeah. Just kind of pile on more and more contradictions until they all just blur together. Yeah.
Russell's careful with this Shalka stuff. He says that Shalka's appearance doesn't presage anything. And he, quote, "We talked about that many times with Kate and Briony. Just fun, a joke. It's funny. It's that simple. I sat here in this office with them and they just thought an unknown doctor. That's what the script said because we had to work out who to get and how we could get him." Then they talk a little bit about how Richard E. Grant was up for it. And then like we talked about with the VFX person, that He did the new photo shoot. Russell says he wasn't paid the fee he would have been paid to be a doctor, obviously. He was so up for it and went and did that, especially for us, very last minute, because we weren't sure whether to do it or not, partly because we're busy and there was a lot of extra paperwork just to do that. But as we watched that parade of doctors, we just sat and went, we've got to put an extra one in, we've got to. That's the fun of it.
So I guess they settled on including an extra one before they decided who it was going to be. I think that's kind of a funny thought. And I guess it's telling about, what their intentions were. Like, it could have been all manner of different ones, potentially. But either way, it's just kind of, as RTD is at pains to stress there, it was just for fun, right? Just for a joke. It's not like John Hurt turning up in the 50th anniversary, like a big reveal. Which I think, considering how fans have kind of just started so much discourse about this Shalka head, and almost RTD is almost kind of fed into that in a bit, as he's still doing it now by talking about it this much in an interview. I think it's the kind of thing that we just fixate on for reasons that I don't quite understand, to be honest. It seems not as important as we're making it out to be.
On that note, let's conclude. What an interesting little addition for the show. One can only imagine who it would have been if not Richard E. Grant. The mind races. There's so many alternate ones we could have chosen. What I would have loved, personally, is one of the Timeless Child doctors. Not like the Morbius ones, but one of the young ones. Like the teenage one that talked with the Sol Pado, whoever they were called, the CIA person. I would have liked that one. That would have been an interesting face.
I mean, if you include one of them, why not all of them? You know, it's like, how do you pick?
Why do the real doctors? Why don't we just do the timeless ones? It would have served the same purpose to convince Rogue he wasn't a bird. So there's a thought.
Should have been Cushing, my opinion. Should have been Cushing. That would have been good.
And that wraps us up for good. Please let us know your thoughts on Rogue, the character, the episode, Tyler's thoughts on the episode, my thoughts on the episode, and of course, Gig's thoughts on the episode. What are your thoughts? That's what we've been waiting for. And thank you very much for listening.